everybody. Welcome back to school. First week of classes, spring 2015. Wow. Did you have a good break? Yeah, great. I'm Lisa Frostino. I'm chair of the English department, and I'm also teaching a section of Introduction to Creative Writing. In fact, if you're in my class, raise your hand. Yeah, my class. If you're in Dr. Taraccio's contemporary fiction class, let's have a shout out for your class. Oh, look at all those hands. And this is Dr. Caragh himself over here, anybody who hasn't met him. And I know that Dr. Spicer's children's lit class is here as well. Could we see a show of hands from you and Dr. Spicer herself? Yeah. So, oh, look, bookends, framing beautifully the room. So, Dr. Susanna Richards, are you in the room right now? She's gone chasing things down. Got a call from Simon & Schuster, I guess, back in December, and they said, hey, would you be able to host a visit from some authors that we were sending on the road? And so we got our heads together and said, well, yeah, sure, we'll have to figure out a way. And so here we are in our first week of classes, having this opportunity to have a panel of young adult authors who publish a lot of books, talk to you about the craft of writing. Now, oftentimes in the English department, we have literature classes, and we're so used to looking at texts from the analytical viewpoint, getting meaning out of it, right? Looking at the elements of the fiction that mean something to us and applying critical lenses and theories. We don't often get a chance to look at it from the writer's perspective and find out how they went about creating these works that we read for meaning. So today, during this class time, I'm hoping we'll be able to pick your brains on this panel about how you go about crafting fiction. Now, I'd like to begin by having you introduce yourselves rather than me ramble on about you. And while you're introducing yourselves, I'd like you to each think in the back of your mind about a scene in one of the books that you have available to pick from here. Thinking about how this scene could be useful to people that want to write. Was it a scene that was really hard for you to write? Was it really difficult? Did it present challenges? How did you solve those challenges, those problems? Or is it a scene that you feel particularly illustrates an element of craft that you think would be useful to people who are learning to write? Is there good dialogue in the scene? Or do you feel really proud of the way you developed the character in that scene, or something along those lines? So after you introduce yourselves, I'll ask you each to do a reading of a scene and discuss a little bit about why you think that people in the audience would make some use of that. And then after we do that, we'll open it up to questions and answers. I know that many of you have come with questions already prepared, and then the discussion itself will probably lead you to have other questions. So that's how we'll structure the class. And so with no further ado, why don't we just go along down through this, through Jason, Caragh, and Chris to introduce themselves.
Good morning, everybody.
Hi.
I know everybody looks so to be here. I'm sorry. You know, I know this is the first week back, but this is a lot better than what it could be, so shake it off. All right, so my name is Jason Reynolds. I am the author of When I Was the Greatest, which is this book here, and The Boy in the Black Suit, which is the one on the end. And then there's another book that is not here called My Name is Jason Mantu. And that's it. That's me. I live in Brooklyn, New York. And I'm happy to be here to see you all, even though you don't look so happy to see me.
And I'm Caragh O'Brien. Can you hear me? Am I in the mic enough? No. Yes. No. Can you hear me? More closer. Okay. Or I could like lean up. Is that any better?
Indifference.
It's indifferent. Okay. Yeah, I'm Caragh O'Brien, and I was delighted to be invited. Thank you for having me here. I live in this part of Connecticut, right around the corner, and it's kind of fun to be back here. I also went to ECSU to get my teaching certification, so I have really literally been in your seat. And I was glad to be here, and I was glad to be finished and move on. So that was sort of, you know, ECSU for me. Again, I'm really glad to be back. I am the author of the Birthmarked trilogy, which is a young adult dystopian trilogy about a young girl 400 years in the future who's a midwife, and it's her responsibility to deliver a quota of babies from one side of the wall where people are poor to the other side where people live in privilege. And Gaia has to, after she delivers the first baby solo, she has to turn it over to the authorities, and she doesn't, the mother doesn't want her to do this, so she has to decide whether or not to obey the law. And by the time she gets back home, her parents have been arrested, so she spends the rest of the book trying to save them. So it's futuristic, it's dystopian, it's really, it's like of this world, but of a later time. So I had a lot of fun writing that. And then when I was done with that trilogy, I started writing the Vault of Dreamers trilogy. These are both from Macmillan. And the first novel, The Vault of Dreamers, is a story of a girl, Rosie Sinclair, who wants to go to learn to be a filmmaker at the Ford School of the Arts. The Ford School of the Arts is unusual because it doubles as a reality TV show. So all of the students are stars of their shows all the time. And they're also required to sleep for 12 hours every night. So that's supposed to enhance their creativity. But Rosie discovers something sinister happening at night, and she has to decide what to do to protect her dreams. So it is also a sort of strange, futuristic story. It's more about art and creativity, and I'm working on the second book now. I've just got an extension. Yay! I'm really glad. It was supposed to come out this fall, September 2015, and it's not coming out till winter 2016, and I'm so thrilled, so thrilled. So imagine getting an extension on, like, your senior thesis. That's kind of where I'm at.
Excuse me. My name's Chris Lynch. I've been writing for a really long time, but this month, Killing Time in Crystal City, the paperback of Little Blue Lies, and the 10th anniversary edition of Inexcusable are coming out. I write strictly realism, and they're also dystopian, I think. What I like about these three books that are being released together this month is that they're all variations on the same thing that I always think I'm writing, that always think everybody's writing, that I think everybody who's talking to me is doing, is unreliable narrators of one stripe or another. I'm fond of saying I wouldn't know a reliable narrator if he bit me. And when we've been talking a lot to students this week, one of the messages I'm trying to hammer hard is that the deciphering of who's telling you what is completely in your hands as the receiver of the information, because whether we know it or not, we're giving a very colored view of every fact we put in a book, or even as we present ourselves. The one new book I'm putting out is very much a guy who sort of is losing track of whether he's even doing that or not.
Well, for equal time, Jason, I'm hoping you might tell us a little bit more about the books that you've written.
Sure. All right. So, When I Was the Greatest. When I Was the Greatest is a book about friendship, three young guys in Brooklyn, New York. And one of the friends happens to have Tourette syndrome. And in order to cope with his syndrome, he learns to knit. And so he's this young 15, 16-year-old kid in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, who sits on the stoop and knits all day long to control his sort of mental illness, which, of course, presents all sorts of interesting issues. For those of you who have ever been to Bed-Stuy, it's not a common scene to see a young guy sitting on the stoop with purple yarn knitting away his troubles. And so the friendships and the family members in the community, like all of these things are what encapsulates this story. Most of my work is about community and family. I'm really big on family because I'm a family kind of guy. I come from a big family and we're all kind of crazy. And so they mean the world to me. And so a lot of my stories have to do with sort of what family looks like, dispelling this notion of the broken home, right? Because I don't necessarily think that homes are broken. I think they're different. But they don't, because a dad's not there doesn't mean that like this family produces broken people. And so a lot of it attacks those things, mental illness, stereotypes, the whole gambit. And the boy in the black suit, it's the same neighborhood, but a totally different kind of kid, because that's a reality, right? Like all those kids can live on one block, And in this kid, he comes from a really great home. He's got a mom and a dad, but he loses his mother to breast cancer fairly randomly. She finds out that she has it, and a couple months later, she's gone. It had metastasized already. And this was the hardest thing that he'd ever experienced, and he wasn't expecting it, obviously. And now he's sort of thrust into a world of grief, something that he's never experienced before. And no one ever tells a young person how to deal with those kinds of issues. No one ever teaches you how to deal with grief or how to cope. And so what he does is he takes a job at a funeral home, and he becomes a funeral crasher. He just starts to, show up at funerals and participate in them as if he were there grieving with the rest of the families. because he finds that being around other grieving people is what helps him feel a lot less alone. And so that is The Boy in the Black Suit.
Where did you get that idea?
I unfortunately was a child who has been to a lot of funerals. And so as I got older, you know, it's just I was in one of those situations. I come from that kind of environment where you experience death very early, and you experience a lot of it, unfortunately. And, you know, there are some bad things that happen in funerals and with death. And then there are a lot of cultural things that happen that are actually kind of interesting and sometimes a little funny. And, you know, and all of that is kind of wrapped up in the book.
Great. All right. So could you take a moment and locate a scene in one of your books that you'd like to share with us? Any order that you want to go in, maybe?
Did I miss the memo where we were supposed to prepare for this?
No, there was no memo.
There was no memo.
I thought it up in the car on the way here today.
All right.
You're on the spot, Chris. No, you're not next. Whoever's ready first can go.
All right.
I think you're ready. I'm thinking. I'm still thinking.
Okay, so this particular scene, this is so Matt Miller, who's the protagonist. This is his first funeral. So he's taking the job at the funeral home now. He was going to get a job at like a chicken shack, but then he's like, oh, I don't want to get a job. You know, it's like, oh, do I want to work in fast food? I'm struggling. Am I going to be able to eat my favorite fast food restaurant if I work here? He's dealing with like all of that kind of stuff. And so he gets the job. He takes the job at the funeral home. And this is the first time that he's sitting in on a funeral. He doesn't know why he's doing this yet. He doesn't know what's sort of leading him to do this, but he knows that he wants to do this. And so this is the funeral of a man named Speedo Jameson, Clark Speedo Jameson. And this is the second speaker, the second sort of like testimonial person in Clark Speedo Jameson's funeral. A giant rose from the second row. Seriously, the biggest man I've ever seen in real life. His head was the size of a basketball, and his back was like a king-size mattress, except made of bricks. Good afternoon, the giant said. I tried not to laugh, but I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This humongous monster of a man had the voice of a 6-year-old. High, squeaky, like cute. I could hear that weird sound when you try to hold in a laugh, but a little bit leaks out like a mouth fart, happening all over the church. People were trying not to crack up, but his voice made it so hard. My name is Mouse, he said, leaning down to get into the microphone. His hands the size of oven mittens were gripping the sides of the wooden podium. He could have ripped it apart like nothing if he wanted to. And Speedo trained me when I first got the job with the trucking company. We worked together for a long time, had a lot of fun, a lot of laughs. Mouse smiled, flashing a big gap in his 2 front teeth as if he was suddenly reminiscing in his mind about some of those moments. Anybody who knew Speedo knows he loved to tell stories, and the crazy thing was, you never knew if the stories were true or not. You knew he wasn't no liar, at least he ain't seemed like one, but some of the stories were just so ridiculous. Mouse laughed a silly laugh. It sounded like a never-ending hiccup. Like this one time, we riding through Arizona on a 5-day delivery. I think it was August. The heat was kicking something terrible. Brooklyn summer ain't got nothing on Arizona. He pretended to wipe sweat from his face. So we pull up to this gas station, some random spot off the map, and Speedo get to talking about how the last time he had been down in Arizona, he stopped at that exact same gas station, and that it was so hot the last time that he seen a horse leaning up against the ice chest. You know those old ice chests that sit outside of some stores? One of them. He said the horse was leaning with all 4 of his legs crossed at the ankle and was panting like a dog. All 4 legs? Then he said that somebody slipped a cigarette in the horse's mouth to smoke because the dang horse looked so stressed out by the heat. The room broke out in laughter. Shoot, so I asked him, Mouse continued. I said, Speedo, you sure the heat wasn't just getting to you and you were seeing things? And you know what he said? He said, nope, I know it was real because I was the one who lit the horse's cigarette. The room erupted again. People squealed, rocking back and forth, wiping tears from their eyes. I mean, not only was the story hilarious, but the fact that the huge guy telling it sounded like a little kid made it even funnier. I looked over at the old lady next to me, and she was chuckling. She glanced at me and saw that I was laughing too, and nodded. Everyone was nudging each other, and I could tell that some of the folks in the room had heard that story before, and in a weird way, I felt like I kind of knew Mr. Jameson, at least for that moment.
So why did you choose that scene, Jason?
I chose that particular passage only because it's really hard. I mean, it's a book about funerals, right? And the hard part about writing a book about funerals is to not allow the book to just be sad, because the truth is that every single part of our lives, at least to me, I believe that like every part of our lives are whole and are nuanced and are dynamic, and that there are very few moments in our lives that are one way, right? And I think what we do oftentimes is we tend to pigeonhole life characteristics as much as we pigeonhole people. And funerals are it's a cultural tradition that we tend to pigeonhole into a sad box. And the truth is that usually there is a spectrum, right? And they do lie on that spectrum because you're missing someone. But when you add in like your cultural elements, whatever culture you are, there are always cultural elements to these funeral and death traditions. They become a lot more interesting and a lot more nuanced, And as a young, there's an old saying, as a young black kid who grew up in an all black environment, there's a saying that says that if you ever meet a man who can't laugh at his pain, don't trust him, right? Like there's a strange, traditionally and culturally, laughter and sort of making jokes. I mean, if you ever go to one of my family's funerals, all you're going to see is everybody crying at the funeral, and then afterwards everybody drunk and like talking crazy and laughing and dancing and sort of celebrating and doing the best they can, because laughter is the thing that you use to sort of fight the pain, right? And I wanted to show that like it's not always one way. And that though this was a sad time, and it's hard to write it because you know what people are expecting from funerals, and so you have to sort of like be your own person in that environment and in that process to say, look, I know what they're expecting from a funeral, but that's not necessarily true. And as Chris always says, who's the narrator, and is there sort of like I could create my own, right? I could invent this thing, even if these aren't true. I could invent what funerals look like if I feel like it, and create that world for everybody else.
Does anybody have a question for Jason after hearing his passage and his explanation? No?
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
So, is one of you ready to share?
You look more ready than I am. I was listening to Jason.
Are you implying I wasn't listening to Jason?
No. Yes, I was.
I'll do it. Right, I'm picking this little bit here because this is when my main guy has run away from home, and he meets this girl who's properly homeless. He's sort of playing at being homeless, but his problems are real, but they're not the same problems she has. And in this first meeting, he's trying to create his new persona. This is where he's consciously trying to alter who he is. At a later point, it gets away from him. Right now, he's just making every social mistake he can make. And for starters, he picks the name for himself of a 1980s NBA basketball player who he particularly likes the sound of. And that's it. And they've just been going through some banter. We pick it up in the middle. Oh, she says, pointing at my face. First thing right there, you're going to have to lose that blushing thing or you are dead meat out there. And God, boy, if that means you took the love thing I said literally, then man, oh man, do we have our work cut out for us. Crap. I'll take the rapid blinking to mean yes, unfortunately. Yes? Grr, I say, punching my own thigh with my cast. How can I possibly have the option not to answer something if my face keeps answering for me? No doubt about it, you've got a conundrum there. A poker face is probably one of those things you have to grow over time, like a beard. Hey, maybe you can grow a beard. Yeah, well, thanks, but if you look closely, I think you'll agree that beard growing is another thing you could probably do better than me. There is a pause. It appears I have said something wrong. What? I say, what? No, I'm talking about my inability to grow a beard, not your ability to grow a beard. You can't grow a beard. Come on, you don't have a beard. Yes, I do. No, you don't. Yes, I do, and thank you for pointing that out, zithead. No, so it's my skin now. Very nice. Feels like I'm talking to my sister. So you have a sister then? No, I don't. Does she have a beard? Is she in the circus? Can we start over again, I say, with prayer-like hands for emphasis? Why? This was just getting fun. Fun is overrated. That is extremely sad, she says in an extremely sad tone. Just how bad was your father? This one's easy. I don't want to talk about that. Okay then, how about, what's your name? She extends her healthy right hand to me across the aisle. I happily extend my less healthy one across to her. Finally, a question I am not only anxious to answer, but one I have prepped for. Kiki Vandaway. Because why not, right? She splutters a laugh right in my face, but still shakes my hand. Your name is Kiki Vandaway. That is correct. I was going to guess Benedict or Kenton or Skippy. Kiki Vandaway, I assure her. And you're just going to go with that, yeah? Because it's my name. Your very red ears wiggle a little bit when you lie. It's awfully cute, like how all elephants keep flapping to keep the overheating away from their heads. Kiki Van. Where have I heard that name before? Is it some sports? So what's your name, I blurt. She laughs. Well, I was going to be Kiki Vandaway until you showed up. So I guess I'll have to go with Anastasia Dimbleby. Really, I say, as if anybody's name should really come as a surprise to me right now. For you, we'll just leave it at Stacy. How about that? Best not to make things any more complicated for you than they already are. Right, so it's more mockery. No problem. Thanks for that, Stacy, I say, getting a little stupid shot of thrill when I say her name. Stacy. My friend, Stacy. I've made a friend. I've already made a friend. Stacy. What do you like, a human thermometer or something? She says. You need to get that blushing thing checked before your head pops right off. I really, really, really do. Sign, I say, pulling out the little stubby blue marker that I've been carrying for just this purpose. What? You want to sign my cast? I want to collect signatures as a kind of record of my travels. And then I'll sign yours. Okay, she says, shrugging, but no thanks on signing mine. I prefer all record of my travels to be kept inside my head and no place else. She then goes on to sign Anastasia Dimbleby in long, sloppy script along the belly of the forearm part. I'm about to pull back when she turns it over and signs Stacy across the knuckle part where I can look at it all the time. So, Stacy, are you running away? Why would I do that? I don't run away from things. Things run away from me. I'm just kind of on a grand tour. That sounds nice, I say. Nice, she repeats, but in a tone with 12 more layers of everything than the one I used. When did your tour start? 2.5 years ago. When does it finish? She lets this last one sit there for several seconds, though her face shows nothing along the lines of pondering. I haven't given that a single minute of my thought. That one sounds like a hint that further questions will not be taken at this time. So we just both look ahead for now. And we'll leave it there for now.
So did you choose that one I prepped for passage to get back at me for putting you on the spot?
I don't like to think of my work as getting back at anybody. No, I pick it because it's sort of like the earliest germ of the thing that I'm talking about the unreliable narrator. I mean, the one in Inexcusable has no idea he's an unreliable narrator. This guy's trying his ass off to be an unreliable narrator, but you cannot outrun yourself, is what happens to him in this. And Stacy essentially remains who she is through the whole book, but he's back and forth and all over the place because he hasn't got his feet under him. She does, despite the fact that she is homeless. Mm-hmm. She knows who she is, and she eventually sends him home because that's where he belongs.
Cool. Any questions for Chris about the passage he just read?
I won't call attention to your sleepiness the way Jason would have.
It's what it is.
Okay, I've been pondering this. This is really interesting to me because I think about unreliable narrators too, and I think about family a lot too. So I'm going to try to choose something that is not those things, just to give some variety for other people as well. So I'm just going to go with the very beginning part of the novel. I think a lot of people, when they're working on novels, struggle with how to begin. And when they look at other examples in young adult literature that's sort of action-adventure, literature, which is what I tend to write, they expect it to start with a bang, you know, or any like Star Wars movie. You start with like shooting things, right? It has to start with some kind of peak action, actually. And so when I started writing The Vault of Dreamers, I started writing a scene about the character because I wanted to get to know her. And I assumed that it would be cut because it's a rather quiet scene. But draft after draft after draft, it stayed and became one of my favorite scenes. So I'm keeping it because it's sort of evidence that, in fact, things don't have to start with a bang as long as there's some kind of meat there. And I hope that that's what I establish with my characters. So I'm just going to read the first few pages. The first chapter is called Night. I missed night. I had other reasons to disobey too, like wanting to escape the cameras, but most of all I missed the deep, vacant darkness of night. We lined up as usual, shivering in our bare feet and nightgowns. Rain streamed down the windows, obscuring the gray view of the prairie, and the patter sounded gently on the vaulted roof overhead. Orly passed out the pills, starting at the far end, and I watched as each girl obediently swallowed, climbed into her sleep shell, and slid her lid closed with a soft swoosh. When Orly reached me, I took my pill like the others, but faked tossing it back. Instead, I lodged the disc up alongside my gums before I took a sip of water and opened my mouth for her inspection. She turned and went on to the next girl. I'd won. I climbed in my sleep shell, spit the pill into my hand, and wedged it under my pillow. "Close your lid," Orly told me. "Do I have to?" I asked. I like the sound of the rain. "You can open it again after your brink lesson if you want," she said. "Sleep well." When Orly switched off the lights, the room went the soft gray color of childhood naps. I pulled my lid closed to watch the brink lesson cast across the glass, a scene of a woman laying bricks, tucking them evenly in a row. What I was supposed to learn from it, even subconsciously, I couldn't tell. Afterward, I slid open my lid again and rolled over on my pillow. Across from me, the next girl fell asleep easily and completely, and from the uninterrupted sound of the rain, I knew 48 other girls fell asleep on schedule, too. Myself, I was secretly, deliciously awake. As the hour brought the darkness closer, I lay fidgety with hope and relished how it felt to be alone, stealing back the real me. The windows darkened like a gift until I could see the faint blue reflections of our domed lids in the glass. A nearly invisible glow fell over the dormant faces, making the girls' skin gleam with faint phosphorescence, as if they had been chalked and scanned under a black light. I slowly waved my fingers before my face, testing. The glow gave my fingers a staggered trail of black shadows, like cartoon lines of motions, tracks in the air. Deep night came at last, bringing me more awake than ever. After 9 nights of drugged sleep, my nerves seemed to have lost the trick of falling asleep naturally on their own, and now they worked in reverse, lighting me up within. To watch the night out my window was not enough. I wanted more. And I'll stop there.
I think you're right. You don't have to begin with a big bang. I mean, that question of why she has to steal her real self back in the night through staying awake is really gripping, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I also, what I really like too about beginnings is having the confidence to know you don't have to explain everything. Like, I don't give you the summary at the beginning. I don't say she's at the school. I don't say why she has to be drugged. You don't know anything about it being the School of the Arts yet. But I just I hope, just sort of introduce somebody into the story so they feel like they're right there. That's what I love to do when I'm writing, and it's what I love most when I'm reading too. I like to feel like I'm there. So I like to do that. Thanks.
So, any questions? I hope you came prepared to ask some questions of the panelists. Don't be shy. I know it's the first week of school. Yes.
Well, I guess this will be for everyone. Mike, because listening to some of these scenes, when you guys are, I guess, in the process of writing, like just a particular scene as the story progresses, we talk about in English, in English classes all the time, theme, social commentary, things like that. When you guys are writing a scene, how much are you thinking about that as you're kind of putting the words on the paper? How are you thinking more about that? Are you thinking more about, does it flow well with the rest of the story? Does it fit here? I mean, I guess that'd be my question.
Well, for me, the story first for me, Like, I don't know if at the end of the day, I think telling a good story is paramount above all things, right? Because if not, then you might as well have just written an essay or a sermon, right? Or, it's like I'm not, my job isn't to sort of like preach or be heavy-handed about anything. My job is to sort of create this world and tell and really work hard to tell a really good story. And so if there's a piece if there's a scene that's being written that might be a really profound scene, but it knocks the pace of the story off, or it doesn't really work with what's happening in the chapter or anything, then it has to go. It can't, then it, right? Or it has to be sort of, it has to be sort of picked apart a bit or deconstructed and rearranged, or a piece here, a piece there, right? If I really needed to be there. But for the most part, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And you can't, for me, I can't compromise a good story for a good scene, ever.
So how much do you three wind up cutting out of your
Oh
drafts?
my gosh.
Goodness gracious.
But I think many students who haven't experienced the process of creative writing yet aren't aware of just how much writers will write and cut before they get to the thing that's kept. So maybe a couple words about that.
Yeah, it actually kind of ties to the previous question too, because I don't start with a theme and know that that's what the book is going to be about. I start, whatever I start with changes because I'm working on it for a year, and it goes through 12 drafts, maybe, or more. So I can start, and I wouldn't be writing about something unless it was important to me in the first place. So I'm aware that, for instance, with Vault of Dreamers, I'm interested in education and the rights of the individual and our right to privacy. I know that those are things that matter to me a lot, and that we should stand up for ourselves. Those are things that I value. So, of course, there are going to be things that I'm writing about, but it has to be, as Jason's saying, it has to be the story first. And that's what's so hard for me, because I want the whole plot to fit together for the whole book. It took me, I'm really in this process right now with my second book. So it took me about 3 months to write the first draft, but it took me half a year to write the second draft, which is ridiculously slow. I mean, I write slowly, but I've never written this slowly before. And it's because I'm trying to get the plot, the scenes to hang together into a plot that makes sense, and I just have a really complicated book. So it's like it has to have its own process, and the book has to help me discover what the process is. It's horrible. I really don't recommend it.
Chris?
Yeah, blending these two questions together. For me, it's always character. I'm writing characters, and if I've written real characters, all that other stuff is going to come in because they're real people. And just like real people, I only do, I sort of throw people together. I never write one solid person I know, but I combine people I know, characteristics of them, people in public life, and I put them together. And by the time I write them, I know, just like a sibling within a range, if you throw a situation at them, what they're going to do. All the other things, just like in my own life, themes come at me. I don't present them. So character first, always for me. As to the cutting process, depends on the book, depends on the process. I try, if I'm getting it right, my books grow in revision. That is by design. I try to keep it as lean as I can. I want to say as much as I can in as few words as I can, and I wait for the editor to tell me what's missing, and then I put it in. Many years ago when I taught at Vermont College, Wendy Lamb came and spoke, and at the same time she was working with two other people who were on the staff, Jacqueline Woodson and Graham Salisbury, and she had the two opposite ends of the spectrum. She said, Graham sends it in, and it's, all right, cut it down, cut it down, cut it down. Jackie's comes in, I'm going, Jackie, build it up, build it up, build it up. And Wendy's top of the heap when it comes to doing that with whatever she gets. These books were, there wasn't a lot cut out. There's a book coming out in May with Algonquin basically about head injury in sports. And it was Elise Howard was the editor, and I've worked with her a lot in the past, but not like this. It was grueling. It was brutal. The process took about 4 times what it usually takes. First submission was a total teardown. Almost everything went. Second submission was a total tear down. Almost everything went, with all, including my self-esteem, my sanity. It all went. Third one, she actually said, "Oh, this is priceless." She goes, "This is great. We now have a working draft."
Yeah.
So now the book, when it comes out, it's roughly twice the size of one of my regular books, and there is a full one of my regular books lying pulpy on the cutting room floor.
Mm-hmm.
It's never happened like that before. I hope it never happens like that again, but that's how it can go.
In case you haven't read a lot of young adult literature, the names that Chris was just mentioning are very well-known, award-winning authors, Graham Salisbury and Jacqueline Woodson. You might have read about Jacqueline Woodson in the news recently at the National Book Award ceremony. Daniel Handler, otherwise known as Lemony Snicket, said something stupid that you might have read about in the news. Anyway, that's just to tantalize you to look into it further.
More importantly, she wrote a fantastic book that won the National Book Award.
She absolutely did. Brown Girl Dreaming is the name of it. Okay, another question. Yes?
How do you know like what comes next in your book? Because I can write short stories, but like carrying it on, I'm like, where do I want to bring this, or where do you want to go? And you still have to stay within like the theme of your novel and character development. And it's like writing a book is obviously very complex, but how do you figure out what comes next? Like what scene and what are they going to do, and how are you going to like build things up to like the biggest point in the book?
That's a great question.
It's a good question.
The question was, how do you know what comes next when you're writing a novel? How do you construct all the scenes and the characters to hold together over that long arc of a novel?
Well, it's such a. I think my approach is that I try to think about, like, similar to what Chris was saying as far as characters are concerned, right? Making sure that your characters are whole and that they are, like, alive, right? And if your characters are alive, then that would mean that they would, just by the mere notion of them being whole, be complicated, right? And if they're complicated, then that would mean that whatever the plot of your story is can't be the only one. Because the people in your story have their own plots, right? And so typically for me, what ends up happening is every single person in my story has another thing, right? Everybody in my story who are all working together to sort of like get to this common place for the sake of the story, but each of them have their own stories, and each of them have their own issues, and each of them have their own sort of subplots that have to be developed in order for any of this to make sense, right? So if I have a character who is suffering from maybe he has anxiety of some sort, right? If I never explore the fact that like his anxiety possibly comes from the fact that he spent 7 years in prison, right? Which then means that I have to explain why he went to prison. Mm-hmm. And then you see what I mean? So like and so I think things kind of, we used to call them, when I was a kid, we used to call them spaghetti thoughts, right? Like back, things kind of sort of spaghetti out a bit, and you have a little leeway to add some meat and some depth to your book by fleshing out the people around you and the things around you, and making sure that everybody in your book, for me at least, all the characters in my book need to be whole. Everybody has to be breathing and jumping. Even if there's a character that seems to just be a placeholder, there can't be, right? There can't be a character. I refuse to put a character in the book just to sort of usher the story to the next place. That character is going to have to be developed, fleshed out, and whole to give the book some credibility and an extra sort of essence there. So
when you're developing these complex characters, the full cast of them, how do you keep them from derailing the storyline? Your most important task, you told us earlier, is to tell a good story. And that needs to have some kind of focus, I imagine. So how do you keep all of those complex characters sort of in line to tell the story?
They all have to add to the whole, right? So like that's the thing. It would be the equivalent of you taking a pizza pie and every single slice of the pie is a different ingredient. But when you get the pie, it's still a pie, right? Like everybody's got their own separate slice, and every slice has its own topping, but together it's still a pizza pie, right? And the same goes for my stories. I do the best that I can. I mean, if you read any of my work, most of it is about like human connectivity, because I honestly believe that like if I talk to you long enough, we probably have a person in common. It may be far off, right? And it could be very slight, but there's probably someone that you and I know, right, mutually. It's like it's a human thing, right? It's a strange human phenomenon. And so because of that, to me, that's always the saving grace. No matter who enters the story, depending on the context of the story, they're all sort of interconnected some way, even if it's only slight. For instance, in this story, there's a guy that is in a fast food restaurant at the beginning of the story that you see at the end of the story. And he seems so random at the beginning of the story, but he's not random at all because no one ever is, you know?
Wow. My mind is blown now.
Don't be.
How about you, Chris?
To get back to the source question, you might be a natural short story writer. I believe I am a natural short story writer. The good news is I think it's harder for a natural novelist to learn to write really good short stories and satisfying short stories than it is the vice versa. How it worked for me was I just started concentrating on writing my stories about the same people in the same place. And I love the form, like Winesburg, Ohio, of connected short stories. And almost invariably, if you do this and you get to know your characters and you build real characters, they will supply a storyline eventually. And I was always writing terrible transitions, so I just stopped writing them. And then the mosaic was coming up as a novel. It's still probably my favorite way to work and my favorite way to read. So I would suggest, even as an exercise, if you're finding yourself writing pretty good short stories and you want to write a novel, find some of the characters that you have that you like and write something else about them, or have them intersect with other characters. And just try that over a few short stories and see if something is emerging. I do that all the time now. I concluded a couple of years ago because I'm getting invited to contribute to a lot of themed anthologies on guns, on what's the point in life when you're no longer a kid. I forget what some of the other themes are, but I just decided I was creating this one place, and I don't write it any other time. It's the first time I've sort of blended Scotland and New England. And I know it's accumulating in something bigger. I don't know if I would certainly not call it a novel yet, but I wouldn't say it's not going to be one.
Chris lives in Scotland, but he's from the Boston area originally.
Jamaica Plain.
Yeah. And I would refer you to talk to Dr. Taracchio because he writes the novel and stories sequence himself, and is a course he teaches now and then. So that might be a good way for you, and if you're a natural story writer rather than a novelist. Caragh, how about you?
Yeah, I could add something to that too, because I started out writing short stories when I was in college, and I wasn't sure at all how to take the leap, and I realized I needed to have the stakes be a lot higher. I think you can have super high stakes in a short story, obviously, but it was so much easier for me when people started dying or being at risk of dying. Instead of like, should I get my coffee? The question was, should I deliver this baby? And all of a sudden, it's just, it's so much easier to deal with a person who has a real problem. And I know the character really matters, but what shows a person's character is when they have to make tough choices. So when I'm thinking about how things start, I actually think back to Ariel from A Little Mermaid, because she wants something really badly. What does she want? What does she want? She wants her legs. That's really all she wants. She wants legs. She's, the other text is she wants to be human. She wants to have another life. She wants to escape her father. She wants to explore new things. She wants to have a mind. But that's what she wants. And as soon as she gets them, she loses her voice, which is, again, about as symbolic as you can get, right? But then as soon as she loses her legs, she has another goal. She has to get kissed before the sun goes down 3 times. That wasn't the goal at the beginning of the movie. That was the goal, like a third of the way through after she got her legs. But if I have that happening in my stories and somebody wants something badly and they have to make a tough choice, like, okay, the woman is being hanged, but she's pregnant, and we're standing here in a whole group of people and nobody's doing anything about it, that the woman is being hanged and she's pregnant. There's a choice to be made there. Do you cause a fuss? Do you wait to do something later? Well, Gaia, and also at the same time, you have a chance to see your mother, which is the reason why you went in the enclave in the first place. Do you go see your mother, or do you try to save the baby? That's a big choice, and how the character responds to that choice will tell you a lot about that person. So I would say if you're trying to move from short stories to novels, just ramp up the stakes.
I think she raises interesting points in terms of like asking the questions.
Yeah.
Right, because I think that's like a part of it, right? What are the questions? What are the questions that you don't have the answers to in a short story, right? For instance, like, have you ever read Solo on the Drums? If you're a short story person, please, if you can find this short story, and it's very hard to find, but it's called Solo on the Drums by Ann Petrie, and it is outrageous. And basically, the whole story is basically a jazz band.
Somebody in my class, write that down.
It's a jazz band. They're at a jazz show, and the drummer is like going for broke on the drums, right? He's like having at it, you know. I mean, he's just going crazy. And it's all good, and the audience is cheering, and the band is cheering, and everybody's cheering, and then the band ends the song, and the drummer is still playing, right? He's just like going wild. And now it's getting to the point that everybody's kind of like, okay, like, what's going on, you know? And the band is like, yo, what are you doing? Like, you're kind of blowing the show at this point, right? You're showing off. And then it basically just says, like, and the drummer's looking at the keyboardist as he's like going off, and he's like, yeah, too bad he doesn't know that, like, the drummer just found out that his wife had been cheating on him with the keyboardist, right? The end. So the question then becomes, what happened before? What happens after? Will they fight? Will there be a murder? Does he throw the sticks at him? Like, what happens? All the questions.
Yeah.
And there's your novel.
Yeah. Did he write the novel?
No.
No, because the short story said it all.
The short story is perfect. But, you know.
That's cool.
That's so interesting. I guess if you combine it all together, the takeaway might be that a short story is more like a solo and a novel is more like a symphony. And all the characters that you develop in great length are like all the different parts in the symphony, as opposed to the single story of a short story. Cool. Another question. Checking the clock. Yeah, we have some time. Yes, in the back.
Why did you choose to write YA Lit, or did you not choose and it just sort of happened?
Good question. Why did you choose young adult lit, or did you not choose?
You want to take that one?
I was writing the same Raymond Carver Light stories everybody else was at Emerson College. And then in my very final semester, just because it fit my schedule, I took Jack Gantos's children's writing class. And I only had this vague notion of some vignettes I wanted to work up of things my brother and I had done when we were young. And as soon as I got into it, it was just like, boom. Because this is my theory about adolescence, is that you never solve anything in adolescence. You just moved out of the category. And if you have the privilege that we have to actually go back in there, I mean, as emotionally as it's possible to go back in there, you find out it's just like all those electrical wires are still exposed. Mm-hmm. It's still very much alive, and I did not see that coming. It was the great secret they kept from us, that if you give them monkeys about what you're writing about, you'll write better. That's basically how it happened.
Yeah. I wrote the best book that I could, and it turned out to be a young adult novel. So.
Yeah.
How did you know it was a young adult novel? Did the editors tell you, or did you figure it out on your own?
I was also reading Twilight and The Adoration of Jenna Fox at the same time, and I was teaching high school, so I knew what all of my students were reading. So I wasn't surprised that it turned out that because I had a 16-year-old main character, that it was also going to end up being a young adult novel. But I wrote what I cared about the most, and I had been writing. I'd actually written romances and unpublished mainstream sort of literary novels before that were, well, the romances were published, but the adult novels were not. And the last adult novel I had written was actually about a family with a teenage boy who commits suicide, and the teenager was the one I was the most interested in. So I think I had been gravitating towards teenage characters anyway, and then once I got going with Gaia from Birthmarked, it just was a really good fit for me, and I'm still really happy writing there. But if I get a really good idea for another character who's just in a totally different age bracket, I think I'd follow that character there.
I think a lot of us, I mean, my editor they categorize us too. You know, you just do the best you can and like write the best book you can write. And some of it has to do with like industry stuff where they just say, oh, well, this is about teenagers, right? You wrote about teenagers, therefore you are going to be categorized as a book for teenagers. And that's fine. Like it's funny because you meet people. I think people always assume it's like, hey man, so how does it feel? I heard you're writing YA. You know, and it's like, it's actually the most awesome, and who else is there to write for? Like at the end of the day, it's like I tell all my buddies who write adult novels, I say, you should thank me, right? We're the ones who create your fans. Like if we don't write those books, you don't have anyone to read yours. And that's just the reality. It's good though, and it's so much more fun. At least I think so. It's just it's a good time, and community-wise, it's just so pleasant, and the people that you meet along the way are great.
A lot of really good writers writing YA. A lot of adult readers who love literature read YA because there's so many great authors, many of them sitting at this table right now, writing books today, contemporary fiction, for those of you in Dr. Taracchio's class. Another question. Yep, here.
When you guys are creating like a character set and like outlining the book or going through your drafts, do you ever find that like the supporting character ends up becoming the main character? Or something along those lines, or like a main character of one book becomes a better character in like a sequel to another book or something along those lines?
It's happening to me right now. It's kicking my butt too. I wrote a novel. It's coming out next year, hopefully, if I can get it done. And over the last 2 years, the main character has been the younger brother. And then the editor said, hey man, it's not really working. Like there's not enough immediacy, so I want you to put it in third person. Right? So now I'm rewriting the book, and I'm rewriting it in third person, and I'm realizing that the book is actually about the older brother, and it's so frustrating because I desperately wanted it to be about the younger brother, but it's just not. It's just not. And it's kind of blowing. It kind of, for me right now, it's really kind of, I'm in the trenches right now.
So Jason, when it was in the first person, it was the younger brother writing about the older brother?
It was the younger brother writing about he and his older brother's lives, right? They were talking. He was sort of giving his like 11-year-old perspective on what was happening in their lives. Yeah. But in third person, you realize he's talking about it, but nothing's actually happening in his life, right? It's really him witnessing all the things happening to his brother and talking about that, right?
Nick Carraway.
Exactly. And so now I have to it's just really hard and really different, and it kind of just knocked me off a bit because it's not what I was expecting. But that's sort of the adventure of writing books.
You just took me back to college in a literature class. I think it was Hemingway, and we were asked who was the main character in one of the Nick stories, I think. And we had the hardest time deciding whether it was Nick himself narrating or whether it was the people he was writing about, one of those people, because that's the issue. When you have a first-person narrator but writing about someone else, is that other person the main character, or is it the narrator whose consciousness or focalizing it? Yeah.
And are you sure your editor's right, or are you in any way still torn?
Oh, no. Absolutely sure. I've written the book 3 times. And then she was like, let's just try it, right? Yeah. And so now I'm trying it in third person. I'm like, oh yeah, this is way better. Oh man. And then you feel kind of stupid. It's like, you big dummy, why didn't you just do this? And it's like, because you really hate writing in third person. But,
it's a process, isn't it though? That's a kind of classic revision strategy, to choose a different viewpoint or a different character to make the the focalizing character. And something you learn as you go, and maybe you never learn it all, ever. I mean, it's still something you might have to do after you've been writing for another 30 years, Jason. Yeah. Another question? Yep.
Well, when you have a debate with an editor or whoever that's sort of critiquing your work, how do you individually know when to stick to your guns and when to maybe take their advice on a thing?
You want that one?
Sure. Well, you've had a lot of editors, probably. I've had 2. How many have you had?
I've had
Come on, old man, you got it.
I've had 8 or 9.
You've had all the editors.
I know because I feel like I'm right. Because I take 95% of editorial feedback. So when I don't want to take it, I'm confident that I'm doing it for a good reason. Because I'm not a petulant author, and I have a lot of faith in the process, a lot more than I had at the beginning. I want more editing now than I had when I was younger. So when I feel like digging my heels, one, I feel confident that I'm doing it for a good reason. My own personal subconscious editor has made a decision, and that's that. And the subconscious editor always knows better than the conscious me does. And secondly, mostly I'm working with people who I've worked with a lot in the past, and we don't fight much. Because I don't give them any lip. When I say I need this way, they go, right, we'll make that work.
tends to ask me questions. She rarely says, well, you should really do it this way. But there have been a couple times when an editor has said to me, you should really, really try this. And I have resisted the idea, but I've tried it just to see what it would be like. And we've almost always gone with what I try. But often they'll note something as a problem, and they'll ask me questions about it. And if they suggest something, their suggestion won't really help me, but I'll realize I need to find some third solution to the problem. So it's a really good give and take.
Yeah, it's a lot of collaboration, man. I
Oh,
think,
yeah.
But before you're actually in the industry, I think people think that editors are really they're going through and just trashing and changing and it doesn't really go, usually, at least for me, it hasn't really been that way. It's a lot of questions, a lot of suggestions, and a lot of them are like, look, if you say we're going to keep this thing, then let's keep it, but let's make it work, right? Let's keep it, but let's figure out it's not working, so let's figure out how to make it work. My editor and I, the only thing that we don't argue about anything for the most part, because I trust her, I seriously trust her, but it's language, right? Rhetoric and language and sort of vernacular. She's always like, hey, did you mean? And I'm like, nope. I meant what I said, right? It's like, oh, you spelled this word this way. This is supposed to be, and it's like, no, because my mom says it this way, and that's the way it's said, right? Like, if my mom says it like this, then that is the word, right? And she's like, but it's not really the word, but it is, because my mom says it that way, right? And those conversations, which are always like, you're right. My editor's usually like, hey, man, I got to trust you on this one, and roll with it, it's cool, man. It's not as bad as it seems for me. Or apparently for them either. But for some people, I'm sure it's pretty.
I think usually by the time a book gets to that phase, it's taken on because the editor likes it, right? And the editor has an understanding of the vision that the author has for the book. So the intentions are good. When the editor makes suggestions, it's really to try to help the author fulfill that vision that you share for the book. If an editor has a different vision and wants you to rewrite it to be the book the editor would have written if the editor is able to write, that's when the problems come up. And I think sometimes maybe this could come from workshopping in classes and stuff, and you get suggestions or feedback from your peers in classes, and you wonder, well, are they right or are they not right? I think you just have to see whether it fits into what you're trying to do. Usually when a reader has some kind of a cause for concern, confusion, or a sense of not really being engaged with the text because it's not developed enough, or whatever it is, it's your job to figure out a solution to it, as Caragh was saying. Maybe what they're pointing out as a problem isn't the real source of the problem. You are the only one who can figure out what the real source is and fix that, I would say. We have time for more questions. Do we have more questions? Yes?
So I'm not really sure how to word this or ask this, but you write what you know. So how often do you trust yourself writing what you haven't experienced, what you can't even fathom? Do you believe in it? Do you think oh, this isn't believable because I haven't been through it. I can't create this moment.
So how do you go about writing something you don't know?
The same way that you would go about writing an essay about something that you've never thought about, right? You just have to do the due diligence and the research. Chris and I sat here last year, sat actually at the same table. I don't know if you remember this conversation that we had. There's a very similar question, and I had gotten in. Actually, I disagreed with Chris and then realized afterwards, oh man, I guess that's actually true. It makes a lot of sense, because we were talking about this guy, Bill Chang, who wrote a book called Southern Cross the Dog. Do you know this? And he's an Asian American living in Queens, New York. He wrote a book about the Black Mississippi Delta. Do you remember this now? About the Black Mississippi Delta. And I was furious, not that he had written it, but that he admitted to the New York Times that he had never even been to the South, right? Which is a doable thing, right? It's right? It's not like we're saying you have to go to Kazakhstan. I'm saying you have to go to the South, right, of America. We're talking a couple $100, right? This is doable. And I was furious because I felt like he was irresponsible. Chris Lynch's response was, well, in today's time, because of technology, because of all that we have at our fingertips in terms of research, it kind of blurs that line a bit, right? It almost hurts for me to even say this, right? You don't really have to do that. You don't even have to go all the way there, right? You don't have to steep yourself in a thing, because you can research it thoroughly and still produce work that is accurate. And that's such a reality, right? That's just the truth.
It's because there is such a wealth of information available to you about everything. It's changed so much in the time I've been doing the job. It's no longer about acquiring the information. It's about filtering the information and understanding the information and communicating the information. Because if you say, well, yeah, it was right there, he should be right there, then you have to say, I need to be in the Vietnam War if I want to be able to write about it, and I can't do that. I think that writers have a different job as translators, as conduits of what is available to us. So that's if we bring a special craft, that's what we bring, because anybody can go there and take photographs and write a mediocre book or a bad book or a completely off the point book, whereas somebody who gets a grip of it before he admitted that he didn't actually get the first-hand knowledge, people are very moved by the book, and nobody's contradicting the stuff he's saying, then I think he's done his job.
What about when the thing you don't know is something more abstract? What if it's something that can't be researched, as in a location or a culture? What if it's a feeling, or what if it's something that even needs to be imagined, like you do, Caragh, in your dystopian worlds? How do you write that in such a way that the reader can believe it?
I don't know. I'm really intrigued by this because to me it's much easier to just jump ahead 400 years and imagine that Lake Superior is gone. You know, that's really cool. And then I get down to how human we are, and there are things that we have that are universal, and like, you know, we do love our families and we try not to make mistakes, or if we make mistakes we think we're doing them for the right decisions. And I'm thinking about Chris writing, you know, a novel about a guy who commits a rape, you know, and maybe commits a rape, and you know that's kind of a leap as an author. And I have a character now who's she's a very amorphous sort of person right now, and I could change her race, and I'm thinking, well, am I allowed to do that, and is that a gutsy thing to do? And if I'm afraid of doing that, does that mean that as a writer I should take a risk and do that? And I'm allowed to write about from the point of view of a 15-year-old girl, and nobody thinks that that's peculiar or that that's not allowed. But she's, you know, so far she's been Gaia in the first book was a mixed race girl. I was allowed to do it. Nobody even like blinked about that. But if I wrote about a black girl in Brooklyn, people would question about that. There'd be a level of question about that. And I have to think, well, can I do that with authenticity? Am I allowed to? Is that fair to? In Prized, I had a girl who was dealing with an abortion, and I knew my family was going to be livid with me for how I dealt with the abortion in this novel, and I really struggled with whether I could do this. And I said to my editor, you know, I'm just not, and I also didn't know if my editor was going to allow me to deal with abortion the way I did in my novel. And she was like, you have to explore this. You need to find out what's going on with this. So I think we're testing ourselves in all kinds of ways to figure out where our limits are and if we need to go beyond them and if we should. And I know I really struggle with that.
Yeah. But don't be afraid.
I wish I, as an author, could just evanesce and not be there and let the books just be. Then nobody could ever find any trace of me. And if it succeeds or fails on an emotional, on a human level, it succeeds or fails on its own merit, not because I've come out and said something stupid or I've undermined my own work. I think the readers get into it, whether you've grasped your people and your situations. And if you get it wrong, you take the slagging you deserve. But if you get it right,
it's a risk you take, you know.
Just don't be there. I don't want to be here, frankly. But I don't mean that this is a bad place to be. I just mean, I wish I was smoke. I wish I was vapor. I wish I was not getting in the way of my own books.
Good luck with that.
I'll get there eventually.
What I'm hearing is that successful novelists, successful fiction writers are astute observers of humanity and can build people that are real in whatever way that is. So it's either innate or more studied, I'm not sure, or a combination of those things, knowledge of psychology, behavior, emotion, all of that. Living.
How many of you are writers too? Can you raise your hand if you're a writer too?
Everyone in my class better raise a hand because this semester you're a writer. A lot of you are. That's great. Now, do we have any questions from the Children's Lit students who might be here curious about where children's lit and young adult lit, if there's a line or no line, or no questions about that? Huh? Yes. Thank you, John. Yes.
Well
So
said.
what's your question?
Basically, the question, like, where's like the age? What can you do in children's lit? What can't you do that you can do in YA lit? Stuff like that.
I thought YA Lit was part of children's lit. Did I miss something?
You mean picture books?
Do you mean middle grade novels?
You mean middle grade? It's like a, yeah,
You probably mean
it's
all the
like-
gradations. What are the distinctions? What can you cannot do in any of them? Right? Is that?
Well, what do you see a
We're
line
talking for
between,
you a
say,
lot
what the
today.
publishers market as middle grade versus young adult?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, from my understanding, there's the publishing distinction between, like, Roaring Brook Press, my imprint within Macmillan does picture books, middle grade books, and young adult books. There might be something in there that's like elementary school readers or something. I don't know. But we're all under Children's Macmillan, so it's all children's. They're all children's books. I guess they consider children from like birth up through 18.
Yeah. But they're all stratified differently. I mean, like, you know, children's books, I mean, like, picture books are obviously vastly different than what we're doing, you know, because they're, 28 pages?
Yeah.
32 pages, thank you. 32 pages, not a lot of words, usually tons of pictures, usually, unless you're BJ Novak, right?
Yeah.
And,
That's so funny.
yeah, it's
I love
silly.
those.
And, you know, no cursing unless you're Adam Nansback,
Yeah.
you know, like, and you know, and then there's like, you know, you have this weird like young readers section, like it's like there's middle grade, and then there's like a section before middle grade that's like, I'm trying to think who writes these books,
Beverly Cleary.
like
I don't
Beverly
know.
Cleary, like these books that are like, you know, I don't know,
Magic Treehouse.
everybody's first novel, right? Like those books, which are very different. It's
What?
it's almost like it's
Oh,
almost like
that they're reading. First novel that they're reading.
yeah, the first novel that they're
Okay.
reading. Yeah, like that they're reading. It's almost like it's almost like a short story,
Yeah.
but as a novel. And then you have middle grade, which is like what 11 to
How about 8 to 12?
8 to 12.
Is that what it is?
These are the professionals.
Some say 7 to 11.
Yeah.
I believe them. And then you have young adult.
Just
And then there's tween, 10 to
And then
14.
there's tween. It's all these like.
It's
and then-
crazy.
And now there's new fiction,
New adult.
New adult.
NA.
From, yeah,
which is weird.
15
That's
to
weird.
25.
New
still
adult.
living at home.
That's Shades of Grey. 50 Shades of Grey.
Exactly.
So do you think about these distinctions at all when
No.
you're writing?
No.
Good.
I don't.
I do in terms of my narrator.
Yeah.
I've been saying this all through this mini tour. I don't think about an audience. When my stories come to me, they almost always come to me in the voice of either. There are two places I'm hung up in my life, 13 and 17. And once that narration gets going, it defines itself. I know that. And I don't have to think about who it's for. I know that my narrator is already doing all that for me. If it's right for him, it finds its own level. And it doesn't mean that the 13-year-old is narrating strictly for a 13-year-old audience. It might go higher, it might go lower, but this guy is the one who's making it whatever it is.
Do you find that they box you though? Like if you're a 13, if you got a 13-year-old narrative, for instance, I have a 13-year-old narrative now, which he's 11. But like I wanted to, he was cursing somebody out, right? Because that's the kind of 11-year-old that he is. But that can't happen in the book.
Yeah, they do.
And the editor's like, nah, not for a middle grade. And I'm like, well, I know 8th graders. I mean, when I was in the 7th or 8th grade, I'm not the kid you wanted to bump into, right? It's like tongue lashing time, right? But they're like, apparently those kids don't exist anymore.
Oh, they do. The censors are more powerful than the child.
I think they do box you, and they make it worse by, especially with older YA stuff. I think that but when they put the ages on there, I think they try and steal a couple of years on the younger limit. I've been criticized for writing stuff that's inappropriate for 10-year-olds. I go, yeah, the cover said it was for 10-year-olds. I didn't say that.
Right.
You know, like my second book back in 1995 had an organic to the story suggestion, a hint of possible necrophilia, right? But it was a high-end YA
High-end
book.
necrophilia?
Of course, right. Of course, that was a hint of necrophilia.
It was, yeah. I mean, somebody had to do it. But then, you know,
Almost.
many years later, I was working with a younger book for Scholastic, and David Levithan was the famously liberal-minded regarding language, David Levithan, and he was editing it, and It was about a dog. It's very complicated, but it's about a dog this kid can understand his dog because of this particular microchip that was stuck into him by a like a evil vet with the designs on ruling the world by ruling the animals in the world. And the dog was here communicating as he's getting his exam by the doctor, and the kid can hear the dog's thoughts, and he's going, now we just want what's best for the dog. And the dog is saying to the kid, yeah, right, ask him where my testicles are. Ask him where my testicles are. And David wrote back, he goes, don't think we can have those. And then later I kind of brought them back up again, or just the subject, and he wrote back, it appears that the testicles have grown back again. And the answer is no.
Okay.
So that's
what a wonderful story to end with. I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time for this class. I want to thank you all for turning out. Thank you for a wonderful panel. We've all learned a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm really happy that you all could be here with us. I'm really happy about all of you. These guys are okay. I honestly say I'm also very lucky that I've gotten to spend a lot of the last year with all of you in one place or another. I think I've been in Philly, in New York. I've been in New York. I've been DC with
Texas.
Yeah, all kinds of places. So it's like, ew, maybe I need to get a life so I can figure out and get some other friends. But I really like these people as friends. So I'm really delighted that today we have a panel of young adult authors who write for young adults specifically. And in our panel, we have a lot of really incredibly diverse talent. And it's exciting to have Chris Lynch here. We have National Book Award finalist, Prince Honor winning Chris Lynch. She's been writing books since when, Chris? When did you write your first book?
Published in 1993.
1993. So Chris is known as an absolutely fabulous, gritty writer who, we learned earlier today, often writes from the perspective of a 13 or 17-year-old boy. So we're really delighted that he's here right now because in less than 12 hours, or a little over 12 hours, he'll be getting on a plane and returning to Scotland. So we're glad to have him here right now. From a little closer to home, we actually have Caragh O'Brien, who was a former teacher in Tallinn, Connecticut, who currently lives between Tallinn, Connecticut, and here. And we're really excited. She has recently published her 4th dystopian book for Roaring Brook Press, one of my favorite presses, whatever. And I was really delighted a few years ago when a marketing director at Roaring Brook said, I think this person might live near you. I'm going to send you a manuscript. And I got the manuscript for her first book with Roaring Brook, and I was absolutely delighted to see it birthmarked, and even more thrilled that they changed the cover art that they sent to me with that manuscript. So Caragh is here, and she's going to talk a little bit about writing dystopia, and specifically about her most recent book, The Vault of Dreamers, and we're really excited to have her. She's also a former Eastern Connecticut State University graduate of the certification program in secondary ed. Right. So we're really glad that she could be back with us. And then we have the newest person to me in my life, who about a year and a half ago was standing in front of an audience in New York City and has an editor who I love and adore, who graciously introduced me to him after he had rocked this audience. And we're really happy that both he and Chris, Jason Reynolds and Chris, came back to Eastern. They were here on January 21st, 2014. They arrived here from New York with another one of their colleagues. They got here, we put them in a room, they did a short presentation, and then they canceled the university. So we spent the day kind of hanging out with a little bit something to do. And if I recall, Caragh made a trek through the snow. Didn't you? I can't.
When they came up to Stores to go to the Yukon Co-op, I met them there.
Right, that's the same day.
Yeah.
So Caragh made a trek through the snow, and we had a very small, intimate gathering of young adult authors at the Yukon Co-op at Stores Center, at that time, the newly opened Yukon Co-op. So Jason's newest book is The Boy in the Black Suit, and he's going to talk a little bit about that. This is Jason's 3rd book. He co-wrote his very first book. My name is Jason, so's mine. Jason, yeah. And then his 2nd book, When I Was the Greatest. And So we're happy about that. So what I'd like each of you to do a little bit of is talk a little bit about your road to writing young adult books. Many people dream of being a published author. You are not only were able to dream about it, or possibly not. I think in Chris's case, we learned earlier today that it didn't really occur to him to write young adult books, but you are certainly highly acclaimed children's book authors who specifically focus on the young adult market. We'll say it that way. So if each of you could talk a little bit about your path to writing for young adults.
Oh, man.
Quickly.
So the short story for me is I always wanted to be a poet. I went to school for poetry. My discipline was poetry in college. It was pretty much what I wanted to do with my life. And then I moved to New York City to publish poetry, and in 6 months got really lucky, landed a deal, found an agent, and then Harper put out My Name is Jason, which was a weird book of poetry and art and the whole rigmarole. And then after that, I pretty much bottomed out. So like I got my big break really, really early on a random sort of fluke mishap. And then just life took a terrible turn. And so the way that the young adult thing happened for me is that I decided I was going to quit writing altogether. I had written a bunch of novels when I was sort of off in the world trying to figure out how to keep a writing career. None of them were good enough. And then Christopher Myers, who's the son of Walter Dean Myers, some of you may or may not know or have heard of Walter Dean Myers.
Who wrote Monster.
Who wrote Monster and a bunch of other incredible books. His son said, look, my dad's getting old. You should probably try to write some of these books, tell these stories. Go back and read one of your favorite Walter Dean Myers books, which I read, which was The Young Landlords, and it pretty much just opened up an entire world to me. I didn't intentionally try to write a book like for young people, but the voice in his books were like these young teenage voices, and I realized that like I could tap into that thing, and that was fun for me. And so I went from there, and it all got really easy after that. It's not easy now, but at that point, it was the easiest book that I had ever written, and it ended up being When I Was the Greatest.
And how long did When I Was the Greatest take you to write, Jason?
6 weeks.
What? Okay, we're not telling anybody that because
6 weeks.
That's kind of unbelievable.
But it took 6 weeks, but it took 3 edits to even get it to the publisher, and then it took like 3 or 4 more edits to get it to the shelves. Okay. So like it was over the course of 2 years. But the first draft of it, the draft I turned into my agent, it took 6 weeks.
Okay. That makes more sense.
Yeah.
And did you have the same agent that you had for your book with Harper, or had things changed? Or...
No, I fired her. She was terrible. She was an agent. I mean, she was good people, but she was. You guys know Aaron Magruder. You guys know, so you know the Boondocks and the comic strip, the Boondocks. Okay, so it's a famous sort of comic strip cartoon, and she was his agent, and he was the biggest client she had in Terry Hatcher, biggest client. Yeah. And so I didn't get a phone call from her. I was with her for 5 years, and I talked to her maybe 3 or 4 times. And so she wouldn't sell any other work, and so I fired her. I had to let go. My old editor at Harper is who introduced me to my new agent, and it all went from there.
Cool. Caragh, you want to tell us a little bit about your path to writing for young adults?
Sure. I'm interested in this way that you like abandoned writing for a while, because I did that too. When I went to school for my BA, and I earned it in physics, and then I left school to write romance novels, and I was right out of college, and I published my first novel, and I thought, well, this is really fun, this is really easy, this is great, I'm going to go ahead and be a writer. And then it took me like 10 more years to publish anything else. So that's a really, really long time, in your life when you're wondering what the heck you're doing. So I realized that I wasn't going to be able to make a living at it, which was what mattered to me besides the art and the creativity of it. So I went back to school here at ECSU to get my degree in teaching, and was happy as a high school English teacher. And I kept writing all along. I published some more romance novels in there too. And then I had a leave of absence from teaching, and I took a half year off to go live in California with my family. And while I was there, I wrote the Birthmarked, and it took me a couple months to write the first draft, and I thought, well, a self-respecting writer will at least try to get this published, and I had no expectation that it would get published at all, because I had lots and lots of failures in there. But I sent it out to a bunch of agents, and they started asking to see the partial and the full manuscript, and I ended up having 4 different agents offer a representation, which is unusual. And
a little bit of a bidding war.
Yeah, that was unusual. So then I started thinking, well, maybe it's not a total loser book. Maybe there'll be something that works here. And then my agent picked it up and sent it off, and we had 3 different offers. So there, too, I thought, it's so much different. When you have something that people actually want, they try to get it from you. You don't feel this horrible agony of, oh, I'm writing things and nobody wants them and no one will read them and I never get a break. There's something that happens when all of a sudden it's working. So since then, I've been writing young adult novels, and I had to resign from teaching English to meet my deadlines, and now I am earning a living writing my novels, and it works just fine.
You want to tell them a little bit of a secret about your current deadline?
Oh, that it was I have an extension?
And that makes you smile a lot.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's typical at this point for a trilogy for dystopian novels to come out basically once a year. And September 2014 is the one when Vault of Dreamers came out. So they were planning on the second book in the series to come out next September, and I've been having a really hard time making the draft make sense. So all fall, I've been really upfront with my editor about it. I said, I'm working on it. It goes forward, it goes back, but it's not coming together. Is there any way we could get an extension? And she's like, that's not going to be possible, but I can shrink things on the production end. It'll be okay. And then finally, a week before Christmas, she emailed me and said, you know what? We're going to extend it. We're going to move it off by half a year. And I was deliriously happy. And then every 10 minutes, when I used to get this feeling of I've got to be working on my book, I got this feeling of, I have an extension. And I was just filled with joy. Every 10 minutes, I was filled with joy. I still feel that now, actually.
And Chris, do you want to talk a little bit about your path?
Yeah, to put it in a really condensed form, I was the quintessential reluctant reader. I never voluntarily read a work of fiction until I was at university as a political science major for some unknown reason. But then I ran into a news writing class and I went, I'm enjoying this. And then I switched to journalism. And then I got more and more into a sort of creative nonfiction. And then I went, well, if this progression is working so well, why don't we just follow that? And I got my degree in journalism, but then 7 years later, after painting houses and driving trucks and proofreading financial reports on the second shift was pretty much the camel's backbreaker. I went back to school and I went to Emerson. I got my degree in writing and publishing. And then I was writing pretty similar stuff to what everybody else was writing. Until the final semester, Jack Gantos' children's writing class just fit into my schedule.
Jack Gantos is a Prince Award-winning novelist of A Hole in My Life. He's also the Newbery Honor-winning novelist of the Joey Pizza books and the Newbery Medal-winning author of Dead End in Norville, which if you are unlucky enough to be in one of my classes in the near future, I am sure you will experience.
And my favorite is Hole in My Life. It's a nonfiction book. Which is the
story of a stupid decision he made as a younger person and how he got out of it by writing between the lines of a Brothers Karamazov, which is a really simplistic summary of it, but I like that.
But it's a brilliant story. And then as soon as I got into Jack's class, for one thing, I forgot to tell it when I told this beginning story. One of the great things about this class was my peers in this class. It was just catching lightning in a bottle. It was a fantastic group. I was still at the stage where reading my own work out loud was like swallowing broken glass. I wasn't comfortable at all. But every week, 4 or 5 people would have to do it. And, my turn came, and somebody laughed, and somebody else laughed. I'm like, I want to do more of this. Everything else that made me feel this good was very expensive. And so, but the bottom line is I wanted to write for these people. I couldn't wait to get back to my desk. And that's a feeling that I always hammer home to my students. Because I've been in workshops that did not have the same esprit de corps. I tell my students the one thing we remember every single time. You don't have to be saying, this is great, this is great, this is great. But the point has to be that we are here to get that person back to the keyboard. We are going to do everything possible to get that person back to the keyboard and improving their work and improving themselves as a writer. I had been in workshops when it was quite obvious that the core ethos was to make sure this person never wrote again. Yeah, and I vowed then, if I ever have a chance, this will never happen in my class.
And you're still teaching today?
Lesley University, Lower Residency, program, and I really enjoy it. My students are publishing, which is thrilling. You know, Sarah Farazan.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah was mine. I mean, mine. All mine. You can even ask her. She'll tell you she's all mine. My wife says about Sarah, I'm really glad she's gay. Sarah, we love each other. And another student who was 2 semesters after Sarah, what's the name of the book? My Heart and Other Black Holes is coming out, and that's Jasmine Nazak. It's a very good title, and she's so smart. I mean, she's got 2 books. One I don't think it's completed yet, but coming out with Balzer and Bray,
An imprint of
HarperCollins, and the stuff that she's publishing is not nearly as good as the stuff that she has on the shelf.
Neat. Well, there's something to be said for not coming out with your best work first, which I think is complicated, actually, and a little bit scary. So let's talk a little bit about your last books. I'm not going to make you read from your last books because that would make Chris happy. But let's talk a little bit about the premise, and why don't you provide some key elements or share what you think you would use to hook somebody into your last books. And we can go in any order. And so, Jason, you ready to go?
Sure, of course. So The Boy in the Black Suit is, in a nutshell, a book about a young man who is grieving. It's about grief. He comes from a really cool household. He's got 2 parents, and they both are really loving, which, funny enough, isn't always the case, right? But he has these 2 parents who are madly in love with each other. They, of course, adore him. He's growing up in Brooklyn. Everything is pretty good. The only thing he's ever had to really worry about in his life is taking pictures at school, like picture day at school. It's like, that's like the worst thing in the world, because he's not very photogenic, and he knows it, but his mom is always gassed up about stupid picture day. It's like, you know, like I can hear my mom when I'm writing, I hear my mom like, picture day's coming up, you know, because she wants to like catalog my life, you know. And then one day he finds out that his mom has breast cancer. And by the time they find out, it's already metastasized. And so a couple months later, she's gone. And here he is now thrown into this world of grief. And in order to deal, he becomes pretty much a funeral crasher. He takes a job at a funeral home and starts to sit in on everyone's funerals, on other people's funerals, and sort of be a part of those funerals with people with strangers, because it makes him feel better to know that other people feel bad too, and that other people are broken down too. And so the book really delves into the world of funerals, but it sounds really heavy, but it's actually, funerals are always like the sentiment is always down, right? And a little bit low, but they're not always so sad, right? Sometimes a lot of funny things happen, and there's always like the tambourine lady. I mean, if you come to like one of my family funerals, always like one lady with a tambourine who at any random time just holds it up, and right? It's like that lady, or the weird the ushers, and the air conditioner is always broken in the church during funerals. I don't know what that's about, but it's always the case, right? Like, you know, like all these sort of things these details and the minutia of our lives around the funeral tradition that we don't pay attention to, that's actually pretty interesting and complicated and funny and nuanced. If I had to pick one thing about the book that sort of wraps up what this book is actually about, I'd have to say that there's a scene where the main character, Matt, is talking to his mentor and the owner of the funeral home, whose name is Mr. Ray. They're in the basement of Mr. Ray's house. And Mr. Ray, you know, he asks him, does he like to play chess? Because in New York City, chess is like the game that everybody, I mean like everyone, from the older people to the younger people, from the drug dealers to the kids to the athletes, everyone plays chess because everyone sees chess as sort of like, you know, it's the game of life, right? You got to be strategic in playing your moves out, and you got to think 2 steps ahead, right? And this is like the New York City's game, the city game. And so he's like, "Yo, do you play chess?" And Matt's like I'm okay at it. And he's like, "Good, because I don't want to play." Right? He's like, "What I want to play is I declare war." You know, and he said, because New Yorkers say that chess is the game of life, but I disagree. He said, life is much more like I Declare War. And he deals the cards out, and like, you know, he turns a card, and Matt turns a card, and Mr. Ray wins the hand, you know, and he turns another card, and Matt turns a card, and Mr. Ray wins the hand. And he's telling him, he's saying, you know, look, life is much like this, where sometimes you may lose and lose and lose and lose and lose, but as long as you still have cards to play, there's an opportunity for you to win. And that life is much more like that, right? It's all up to chance. There aren't many strategies. You can't predict what's going to happen. You can't predict your mom dying, right? That's a reality. And so the best you can do is keep cards in your hand and know as long as you have cards or as long as you have breath, right, there's an opportunity for you to be happy, for you to win. And that is the book.
Wow. Intense.
You know, nobody has to buy it.
Yeah.
It hasn't been out very long, so we don't really know yet.
Great.
First, Caragh?
Well, I say we switch our books first. Like, maybe
Oh, yeah.
yours in front of you. And
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Like, because they'll get confused.
well, I don't know. Some of us are visual. These are Chris's books. These are really nice ones. So go ahead.
I thought that was just you putting yourself in second. Okay. Basically, what I'm talking about in these books, the ones that are released in various editions this month by Simon & Schuster, are all
Chris
very...
had 3 books released this month.
But they're not
by
all
Simon
new.
& Schuster. Yeah, they are. So he had a 10th anniversary book, the paperback of a book that came out a year ago, and a brand new book.
Yes.
It's a little trifecta.
Yeah, it's not that I wrote 3 of them all at once. I still want to take credit for doing things like that. But I'm very happy to see them all coming out at the same time, because I like the way they're... I hadn't even thought about it until I saw them together. They're very different takes on my feelings about unreliable narrators and unreliable people, which to me is really everybody. I don't think I've ever written or read a reliable narrator in that. I don't... these guys are lying on purpose. This guy is lying at first on purpose and then sort of loses his control of it. This guy is never aware that he's lying. That's probably closest to my real feeling about people and what they say and what they do and what they say about what they do. I don't believe anybody wakes up in the morning and says, I think I'll screw with the fabric of society today. I think they do impulsive things that are hard to take and hard to look at, and they have to create a reality that they can live with about themselves. So I think they do impulsive things, and then they say, well, no, it wasn't what it looked like because I'm a good guy, and good guys don't do that. So what it really was this, completely turning logic on its head. But not because he's just a rampant liar, it's because he can't live with that vision of himself. And I think that that's far more common than real evildoing. I haven't encountered real evildoing a lot in my life. I don't think so. Not personally. But I've encountered a lot of rationalization and justification for the things we do. And that's insidious. And it's hard to do anything about because I don't believe most people are even aware they're doing it, which I think makes it a much more real, nefarious situation.
You know what I realize? That some of our people may be less familiar with this term, the unreliable narrator. And Chris, what do you think of if you were to have to define for your students or our students the unreliable narrator?
There's a more traditional one who you know he's playing games with you. There's a more prevalent one, I think, who does what we all do, who just has a take, an interpretation of who we are and the things we do. We were saying to a group of high school kids the other day, Jason and I could set up some kind of arrangement here and ask you all to just give us a quick short of 1 page about what Jason and I have just set up and what Jason and I have just said for the last half hour.
Because Jason and Chris have been on tour most part of the month at least.
And whatever there were, 40 people in the room, they're all going to be different unless you're looking over each other's shoulders. They're all going to be very different interpretations of what reality actually is. And a lot of it, I mean, all of it comes from all of the things that have happened to you up until this minute. About your parents and whatever traumas have come to you, whatever joys have come to you, the losses you've had, the privileges you've had, all are going to inform what you're seeing there. And still, whether it's a bottle of water or a football game is a great example. You know, you talk to people on one side, and these are your villains. You talk to people, and they believe it. That's the unreliability. In a book, there's going to be primarily one voice telling you what's going on. I'm just saying to these kids, you are the receiver, you are the decoder. Ultimately, this is, I think, empowering to readers, just to be reminded that you're in charge of what you perceive and what. I don't think there is ever an ultimate reality. I mean, you know, somebody's shot dead in a mystery book. That's a reality, but everything else that goes into it and everything else that happens after it is all subject to the teller, and that's what we're up to all the time. And we think we're, you know, doing our best to give a kind of truth at all times. But sometimes it's even by telling literal untruths.
So why don't you tell them a little bit about Killing Time in Crystal City, specifically, since that's your newest work to enter the market.
Okay. Now, there's a lad. His parents are split up, and he's living with his mother and his sister. And that doesn't work out. He wants to go live with his father. He goes to live with his father. And the big shock is that he's gone unannounced, and he finds that he's not welcome, which to me is really a hard thing to take. The father, just like everybody, just like kids, parents need time and space to work things out. This guy didn't have that stuff. He had created for himself a life that was no longer a family life because he thought that's what he was left with, and he went with it. And his son didn't fit into that, but they needed time to work it out. But being a couple of guys, yes, thank you, they didn't take the time to work it out. It just got more and more hostile, and they sort of were in their own corners. Basically, his best friend was sort of, to a degree, interpreting it for him, but he still couldn't. He couldn't hear it. He wanted to be loved, and he wanted to be loved right now, unequivocally, unconditionally, and that couldn't happen because he doesn't see his father as a human being. And when he goes out on the road and he finally runs from that house, and he just makes himself homeless, even in a way that he's not really homeless because it's a choice. And he starts hanging out with people who are homeless and who don't have a choice, and eventually come to resent that. But he's the first step in his reality is negotiable phase of his life is when he starts talking about, he runs into a girl and she has a cast and he has a cast, and she says, how'd you get it? And he says, my father did it. So technically there is some thread of truth in there, but what happened was he threw a punch at his father, and his father held up like a particularly metallic laptop, and he got a little stress fracture, that's all. But so I mean, quick digression. I'm nothing if not digressions. I have a nephew, and he was a very sharp and wily kid, and he was hysterically funny. Even at 4, he was marching across the lawn during a party to go to the house next door, and his other uncle goes, Bruce, did you ask your mother? He goes, yeah. He goes, did you ask your mother? He goes, yes. And he goes marching across the lawn, and Mike says, Bruce, wait there, I'm going to ask. And he goes, okay, fine. And he goes in, he goes in, he goes in, he goes all the way up to the door. He's just at the door. He's going, I asked her. Keeps going, he keeps going, I asked her. He's going. Just as he goes through the screen door, he goes, but she said no. Now, up until that point, he was sticking to the letter of the law, but nowhere near the spirit of the law. This is what this guy starts out doing, and then he loses complete control of this. And I think that's a typical thing that happens. You lose yourself. You cannot run from yourself. You lose yourself. You lose your story, you lose your backstory, you lose your sense of self, and then you lose complete understanding of what is true. Does that?
That sounds great. Caragh, you want to talk a little bit about your first book in your second trilogy?
Sure. I'm really intrigued by this unreliable narrator thing. I just want to add, too, on sort of the same tangent, that Rosie, the main character in my novel, is to a degree unreliable, too. Partly because she doesn't fully know what's going on, but even with things that you'd think she might understand, she doesn't get it. So, like, one of the things I like to play with in this book is that Rosie meets a young guy named Burnham, and she thinks Burnham's just a friend. And I'm hoping that anybody reading the book would realize that Burnham really likes her. Like, he has feelings for her. And she is oblivious. But because I and Rosie are not the same person, I'm hoping that as the writer, I can show you that Rosie's not reliable, that you can't trust Rosie to understand everything around her. For me, there's a really fun play between what I know as the writer and what Rosie knows as the character in the book. The Vault of Dreamers is about this girl, Rosie Sinclair, who wants to be a filmmaker. So she goes to a really elite, exclusive school for the arts called the Ford School, which doubles as a reality TV show. So all of the students who are on the show are also being filmed all the time, and their feeds are broadcast across America, across the world actually, and people vote for which students are the most popular, and the ones who are the most popular get to stay on the show, and they get to earn money for being there. The other unusual thing about the Ford School of the Arts is that the students are required to sleep for 12 hours every night. It's supposed to enhance their creativity because they're driving so hard during the day. But what Rosie discovers in the first chapter is that one of the school doctors is tending one of the students while she's sleeping. Rosie skips her pill and stays awake, and the other students having a seizure. So something very bad is happening to the students at night, but it's a secret. And Rosie has to find out what that is and what she can do about it. And she ends up wondering if she's kind of going crazy because the things that seem true to her do not seem true to anybody else. So it was really fun to write. And because Rosie doesn't know things, I had a really tricky time writing it because I was writing it from her perspective. And since she didn't know, I didn't know either. So I wrote the whole first draft not even really knowing who the bad guy was. And then through multiple drafts, I realized who the bad guy was and what his agenda was and when he was doing things. And I had to slowly piece together this book over many drafts to make it make sense.
One of the things that we haven't talked about today in any of our various iterations of presentations is really who you're writing for. So we've defined who you're writing for as generally the young adult, plus or minus. Of course, there are 50-somethings who read all of your books, I'm pretty sure. And we often define the young adult as someone between the ages of 13 and 21, plus or minus, unless you include new adult, which is somewhere between 15 and 25, and other things. But each of you does not steer away from what I would, for lack of a better term, call the gritty topics. I like to call them the topics that adults are scared of. Sex, drugs, rock and roll, money, literally, or emotions or other things like that. So when you're thinking and when you're creating your books or hearing other people react to your books, how does audience play into that?
Tough one.
I think the example where I have that most conspicuously is in Prize, the second book of my Birthmark trilogy, where my main character has to help another character have an abortion. And it's a pretty weighty issue. And when I was working on it, I was very torn myself about how to present it in the book, let alone let the characters decide what to do. And I knew that my family would be really uncomfortable with the things that I was saying. And I was afraid that I would be drawn into public conversations about abortion, and that had always been a really sensitive topic in my circles of friends and acquaintances. But I felt that I needed to be as true as I could be to the story. And the story really required having these things happen. So I was thinking about my audience in trying to be sensitive to knowing that people would have lots of different opinions about abortion and come to the book with a lot of strong opinions already. I tried to be aware of those people having strong opinions, but I also I just did the best I could. And what I have found is that people read what they're ready to read. So I've had people that are 10 years old read the book, and people that are 60 years old read the book, and they come to it in really different places. And some people, they just like, the abortion issue is not big to them at all. They're comfortable where they stand on that issue, so they just read through the book and it's nothing. And then I have other people that get halfway through the book and write me letters saying how disappointed they are in me, and they can't let their daughter read this book, and how dare I, and shame on you. So I think people, I just trust people to find what they need to in the book. I'm mixing up lots of things here, what I'm trying to say. But I think that's true of like sex and language and hints of things too. Like I can have characters where I'm implying that a young boy has been abused by somebody, and if I'm subtle enough about it, the 10-year-olds reading the book won't notice that at all. But the adults who have more sophisticated minds will realize that that kid was probably abused. So even if he lies about it, they'll know what's really happening there. So I'm trusting it'll go over the heads of the people that aren't ready for it, and then it will add some layers for the people that are ready.
So, when thinking about audience, for me, I on a very base level, at the very top, at the very bottom, the base level of what I think about going into this is that, to be very honest with you all, is to offset some of the imbalanced stereotypes about young people of color. That's a very sort of at the very minimum. That's like always sort of where I start. And the reason why is because I grew up as that kid. I was the kid that I was the kid they say wouldn't live to see 21, right? So for me, it's really important to provide stories, not just for those young people, but also about those young people, so that they feel a lot less ashamed, and the people who are not them feel a lot less afraid, right? Empathy can't be created if we don't know, right? The only reason that we can sort of empathize with, things like something massive, a massive genocide like the Holocaust, is because we've been taught about it. Right? But if a little kid growing up in my neighborhood in D.C. or in Brooklyn or in Southside Chicago, and I was never told about it, I would wonder what the big deal is. But once you get taught about it and you become informed and you become exposed and educated, it's a lot easier to then empathize with people who don't look or sound or act like you, right? And then in that, you can always find sort of like things that are similar, right? Usually it's a lot easier to find those things, right? Chris and I have been talking about this for the last week. Like, man, our stories are so different yet so similar, that even though I'm talking about very specific kids from very specific neighborhoods, at the end of the day, kids are kids, and issues are issues, and life is life. And if I'm talking about a family that acts this way, 9 times out of 10, most of us in this room have family members who act the same way, whether you're in Brooklyn or in Connecticut, right? And I think, so when I think about sort of audience, at the base level, I'm thinking about adding some, as we say, some paint where it ain't, right? Putting some paint where it ain't, right? Making sure that you're telling the stories that aren't necessarily being told often enough about people who are often judged and prejudged, and trying to do your due diligence to sort of add a little balance to the story. If I left it up to the music, then we were lost, right? If I left it up to the movies, we're lost. If I left it up to TV, good luck finding us, right? So like if I left it up to the news, we all know, right? So like that's a reality that a lot of us are afraid to talk about, but it's our reality. So everybody has a responsibility, right? And my responsibility, as they say, to a hammer, every single problem is a nail, right? So as a writer, my job is to create the work to sort of tip that scale a bit, if I can. And I think so. That's always here when I sit down. It's like, look, I see these kids in the street. They need their stories told accurately and with some integrity, right? The least I could do is at least try to tell their stories accurately and with some integrity. Show them as people and not as animals. Make them whole and not inhuman.
I think there's so much to what you say. Jason and I were talking earlier about the fact that if we were walking down the street, this is a slight hyperbole of what we were talking about, but if we were walking out into the street, he might be stopped, but I might be the murderer. But the likelihood of my being stopped as the murderer is relatively low. And how wrong that is.
Just the way it goes.
You know.
But that's why this is important, Right, that's, you know.
And it is important. And you have fabulous characters and other things. Chris, do you want to talk a little bit about the 13 and 17-year-old boy in you?
Yeah, I never have to. For my YA stuff, I never have to think about it because the narrator dictates what the book is going to be. I'm somehow emotionally stopped on two spaces, probably in my own narrational development. One of them is a 13-year-old narrator, one of them is a 17-year-old narrator, and almost all of my books have fallen into one of those two. They decide, they tell a story in a way that they find interesting about things that they find interesting. Once I get that narrator, I never think about it anymore. I never see an audience at all. When I had to move down to lower age groups, that was particularly tough because, like, for the Vietnam War series, I had to learn to write the experiences not only of 18-year-olds, but 18-year-olds in the most in-your-face reality imaginable, while keeping it appropriate for, 10, 11-year-olds. And the part that most people, I think, don't get in advance, and I didn't get it in advance, but the editors, my editors at Scholastic, were great in helping me along with this, is that you can't just remove words and then plug in other words because it doesn't work. It doesn't sound right. It doesn't flow right, and it's far more dishonest than an unreliable narrator. You have to learn. It's like thinking in another language. It's like you can't. If you're trying to do Spanish, you can't just be plugging the words in. You have to learn the language and speak that language for it to come out right. It took a while, but I think I got there, and then I learned to love it. Because it made me a better writer. I know it made me a better writer because you have to generate the same emotional responses, the same rich environment and experience, sharing the same experience emotionally between your guys and the guys who are reading you, with a much smaller palette to work with. It made me think more than perhaps I had been doing for a few years with language that my older teen books were used to. I would have, freedom to default to whatever word I felt like, and I didn't have that here. I so didn't have that, and it was made very clear to me. I mean, things like, I had to take out beer. Now that's a restriction.
You had to write about the Vietnam War without beer in it.
So I defaulted to.
Totally.
That's just wrong.
And if I, because of the channels, they said you can do it, but it's just not going to go to so many of the people you wanted to come down here specifically to talk to. And I said, well, I have much bigger realities than beer to talk about. The beer was garnish for me. I need to be able to tell the story and get it into these hands. So what I had to do, rather than just put something else in, I said, what is something from my experience that has real texture to it? It has its own. And I came up with Moxie. I remember, it's a singular thing. And then out of that grew this whole thing. One of my guys was obsessed with Moxie, and he has a tattoo of Moxie. You know that mad scientist guy who's lurching out of the can to make you drink this stuff? It became a very big thing. And then the whole thing of Moxie became a little bit of a...
You might have to tell them what Moxie is.
Gumption.
Do you know, well, Moxie, the drink, do you know what it is?
Where Moxie comes
It's like a tonic drink, a medicinal. It started as a real medicinal drink, and unlike Coca-Cola or something, it still tastes like a medicinal drink. And it's got this really crazy guy. You Google it. The logo. It's a bright orange can, and it's like this completely made up scientist guy. He's fairly bursting out of the can to give this thing to you. Yeah, and then people who drink Moxie, I had an uncle. He's like, it's exactly right. That's exactly what your drink should be. And because of that, because I was forced out of my comfort zone, I went in a different place, and it made a richer book. Yeah. But I'll also make, this comment that, for better or worse, God bless America, I couldn't get anywhere near religion or swearing or sex or alcohol or drugs, but I could absolutely splatter the screen with blood. They had a very light touch pulling me back from that. And I'm glad they felt that way about it, because if I couldn't, my feeling with this is I was thrilled to have the opportunity to get in and talk to younger guys about, both the heroism of warfare, but the nasty brutality of it. I think over time, kids who are interested in war-related stories get both, but I think far too much of the time we have saturated them with heroism first and then tried to, feed them the sadness later. I wanted to give them the chance to get both at exactly the same time and, make up their own minds and feel what they wanted to feel about it, rather than saying, well, the only way to be a hero is, I suppose, I have to go through this stuff, because you already want to be a hero, and they've already been given all these stories of people who go to war who are heroes without the fear coming in, without the ugliness, without the betrayals and all this stuff. And these books gave me the chance to give the whole sloppy, disgusting mess all at once.
And how many books are we going to expect in that series? You're up to 5 now?
That's it for the Vietnam series.
Okay, 5.
And then there's 4 in the World War II series, and then I have a different war-related series coming up after that. But I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And another thing about it is how the nature of research itself has changed in the time I've been doing this job. Now it's just cascading in. So I'm just getting flooded, just from my desk. And I had to I bought an hourglass. I said, when I know you're only going after one caliber of bullet or one name of an explosive, but this is all the time you get. No more of this. I would go for one gun, and I'd look up and 4 hours had passed because I got in there. Then I explained this. I was explaining it to my younger brother, and he goes, "Yeah, what is that? I'm a total pacifist, but I'm a sucker for the machinery of warfare." And that's another opportunity I have. I'm told all the time, more than all the other books, by teachers and librarians. Boys are just rushing in to pull these out. And once they get in, I'm writing anti-war books in my mind. Whereas if I said, "Hey kids, come on over and read my anti-war books," it's like, wow, what a lonely corner of the universe that would be.
You think they'd be dusty and lonely on the shelf?
Yeah, and they wouldn't be publishing them at the rate they're publishing them. So I'm loving that. I'm drawing in my younger brother.
Can I ask, well, I'm just trying to think, because it takes me like a year to write a book. And if you've got, how often are your war series books coming out? 2 a year?
2 a year.
Okay, and then you're also writing other books on top of that at the rate of 1 a year, 1 every 2 years?
Yeah.
That's a lot of work. That's great.
But a couple of things. One is, with a series book, as you would know, a little bit less than it is with this, once the scaffolding is built, the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and 5th, I have all the same characters. Yeah. They're all the same people. In fact, they start out together in the same book, in the same place. And then I splinter them, but they're in communication with each other and all that. So my infrastructure is all there. In fact, they come back in book 5. The ones who come back are in the same place with the same parents that you see seeing them off in the beginning. So it's heavy lifting in book 1, but a lot of that heavy lifting, it's not the same as when you write 3 novels that have to from the ground up all over again.
I think it still sounds pretty hard.
And it would be impossible if the books sort of stole from each other, but they don't. In terms of energy, material, and language, they're very different. Every time I finish an older novel, I'm really anxious to write one of these, and vice versa, because they feed very different parts of my satisfaction sponge, whatever you want to call it. But they don't compete.
That's cool.
They give me. It's all yours. I'm already embarrassed. I said it. So take it away.
You all can have that one. Satisfaction sponge.
But they actually give each other a boost, because when you're doing something that pulls a certain part of you away and you can't do it, and you're thrilled, it's like a slingshot back into the other thing. I don't know if it always worked that way, but so far it has.
That's good.
So I'm kind of dying of curiosity right now. I have a little writer's gossip need, and that is how much do you write each day? I mean, you're all in the midst of projects right now, so we're glad you're taking a little bit of time to be with us. But what's something that we would expect or what do you expect out of yourself? I love this whole idea of the hourglass and other things, and I might have to go get myself a very short, small hourglass. To keep.
Well, how many of you are writers too? Would you raise your hand if you're a writer too?
We have a few.
It barely qualifies as raising the hand.
I don't even know. Look at me. We had the same problem at Wyndham High School earlier today. It's like, wait.
My schedule typically, I'm super obsessive, which a lot of us are, I find. But my schedule typically, when I'm not traveling, is Monday through Friday, 8 o'clock in the morning to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So 6 hours, Monday through Friday. And whatever comes in that time, right? So I don't, there are days where there's, I don't know, there are 2 pages, right? There are days where there are 10 pages. There are days where there's just me clicking the down arrow key, just like looking, like staring at the words, but just like, man, but I try to devote the time to the work, it doesn't get done. It is, just books don't write themselves, right? So I have to sit there tirelessly every single day for me. And if I don't, like right now, I've missed a week because we've been traveling a lot, and it feels crazy. It feels crazy. I feel like I've fallen behind. I've got the wheels are turning and all sorts of things are happening. She did work today, right? It's like there's a for me at least, there's a bit of obsession, but it's what's necessary in order to do the work that we're trying to do.
And do you write at home? Do you write in a coffee shop in Brooklyn? Do you write at the library? There's a lot of coffee shop writing going on now.
I go to the car. I'm super, I'm a little strange in terms of just being a creature of habit. So I go to the coffee shop every day, same time. I get the same latte, 1 sugar. I get oatmeal the same way, the same time. Noon, I get another latte, 1 sugar. I have the same salad.
Don't normally.
Like it's literally like the same every single day.
So you don't even have to ask for something. They just come and deliver.
It's all the same. And the reason why is I read this quote by W.H. Auden years ago. And the quote says, to paraphrase it, it says, to discipline your passion, you must discipline your time. Right? And he's saying that, and it was all about if the brain is a muscle, right? Like muscle memory. And that the part of the brain that is imaginative, if you can do it at the same time every single day, you'll never have to search for it. The brain will know what to do. Right? And so I don't know if it's true or not, but I've been testing it for the last 5 years, and it seems to be working out all right,
Good.
Anybody else?
You got a really cool one with all the rooms.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Because my kids left me, so I have these rooms. Each desk has a bed within falling distance, so I just fall down when I need to. Here's something I can contribute is that more the last few years it's been alarming to find something I knew was creeping up on me. I don't have the requisite drive early on in a project that I need, so I've always later on I get it, and I get it in spades. It flies, and I'm on fire. This past year was the first time I don't. Later on, I've been counting on that boost at the end, and I'm doing it. And during one particularly bad period, I was aware that it wasn't coming. Not that I couldn't think of anything, but it was my pace was just slower, like an athlete. Like, so it's just physically slower. Yeah, but I never expected that to be the case in such a graphic, dramatic, obvious physical way. Then there was a second, more baffling bad period this year, where I knew I was writing well, and I knew it was going well. And when it came, it was late. It was really due. And it came, and I was like, right, it's back. And I'm flying. At the end of the day, I look, and I go, where are the words? Where are the pages? They were flying. And I thought I was flying, but only in terms, on the second one, it was only in terms of my not recognizing the difference between the old me, the young me, who was producing a lot of words and producing a lot of book at the same time, and the older me who's still producing the book. I was really pleased with the work, but I thought it was more. I thought more of the work of the book was down on paper, not paper, but the equivalent, than was there. And and gradually I was getting used to it. And I was going, okay, well, this is the new reality. As long as I know what the reality is, let's hope that urgency thing comes a little sooner. But it was kind of frightening.
So are you a morning writer or an afternoon writer?
Much more morning, but I'll without the constraints of kids and the structure. I mean, a couple of periods this year I was a round-the-clock writer. I was just, because I had some serious deadlines that were converging, and it was all my own fault. There's a certain liberation to knowing it's all your own fault. You don't go around grousing about whose fault this is. You, mirror. And I was working. I didn't have dinner anymore. I referred to it as darkness lunch. I would go down have dinner with my lovely, tolerant wifeling, and then I go back upstairs and I'd start working basically through the night until I fell out. It was 3, 4, 5. I would sleep for 3 hours. I would get back up. One time I realized my wife's a teacher, and I'm, this works now because I'm upstairs just prowling, right? I have 3 different desks, and I go back and forth because there are different projects. Some of them are not fiction, they're things that are related, and I have student work to do, so different projects. I learned that I read it about John Updike did that. He had 4 different studies.
Right, different proximities.
And you just get a different space and a different energy, and you can get away from what you need to get away from. Nice segue here. And then I heard, my wife is not thrilled with this. She knows it's temporary, so it can work-ish. But I realized I hadn't been to bed, and it was almost 9 o'clock, and I heard her staring, and I was such a coward. I just threw myself into a bed. Didn't want to have this conversation. Waited there and hovered there until I knew that she was gone to work, and I just got right back up and I started typing again. But these are places I had never meant to be. And it needs to be fixed.
Yeah, I was going to say, it always, I remember being 16 or 17 or 18 or 21 for that matter, and sitting in an audience and listening to a writer say the exact, that kind of I'm working around the clock. And I remember thinking to myself, man, that's amazing, right? It's also romanticized until it's you, right? It always sounds like, life of the writer, you just be drinking mad coffee and whiskey and writing all night. And then you get to do that, and you're like, this is not awesome.
It's really more like
not
just
okay.
Hammering carpet nails into your head all night.
Exactly. It's more like that.
Romantic. It is not.
Romantic. It is not.
And Caragh, what about your daily routine or your writing?
I'm somewhere in between them. I'm glad I'm sitting between these.
Perfect.
Yeah, I kind of get up and I exercise on my bike and check my email, and then I start writing. And I write. I sort of forget to eat. And my husband gets home at dinner time, and I go, where'd the day go? It's different for me depending on where I am. I have a really hard time generating first drafts, or in this case, second drafts. I really struggle with them. So I try to make myself write 5 pages a day. When I'm really getting down to it, I'm I hate this book, it's not working at all. I still make myself get to 5 pages. And if I can get to 5 pages, whether that's at 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 9 o'clock at night, I feel okay, well, at least I did it. And I'm not too hard on myself. I mean, if I've really written all day long and I've been deleting a lot more than going forward, I'm just well, whatever, that's the process. And I give myself credit for it. When I'm revising, which I find really fascinating and more fun, and I can make better progress with it, then I want to do it all the time, and then I set myself limits so that I tell myself I will not write past 9 o'clock at night, because I want to have some time to just, not be writing every day.
Cool. All right, one of the themes of today, off and on, has been this whole idea of unreliable narrator and lying and other things. I'm just kind of curious whether you have any ideas or thoughts on this idea that I've been grappling with a lot, and my students will be grappling with soon, but they don't know it. And that is that we so often tell young people that writing is a really linear process. Come up with a topic sentence and then write a story, and it's all going to flow from there. And I think this is a pretty blatant lie, but you may disagree with me.
Well, I think what we do is actually so far removed from what we're doing in the classrooms. You could really pick any element of what we do in classrooms and say that's a nice starting block for something, but it has very little to do with what we're doing later. It's probably important to learn about, verbs and pronouns and things in high school or whenever, but, I'm not thinking about that when I'm writing at all.
I heard a quote one time that said, all the good writers fail English. And you know, I don't necessarily think that's true, though. I failed English, and I'm not a great writer, but I definitely failed English only for that reason, right? Because for me, it didn't make enough sense that you could write anything and it not be creative. It was really hard for me to grapple with the notion that anything written, like that people were writing things that were not creative. It seemed ridiculous that anyone would write anything that's not creative. Of course, now I know that some things just have to be the facts, right? But in college and in high school, I was like, yo, it was like, you know, write an exigency paper, or, you know, this is just a biography, and it's like, imagine a world where, you know, and my teacher's like, XXX, right? Like, you fail again, Jason, you know what I mean? And I'm like, why would you not want to read this, you know, this paper? And she's like, I want the facts, you know? So I think that, you know, but in terms of like the question about like linear and like, is writing that way? The truth of the matter is creative writing is rarely ever, from what my experience is, a linear process. Rarely ever. I feel like so much of the work, at least for me, is scattered. Even if it's not necessarily scattered on the page, it's scattered in my head. It never is like this sort of step by step, this happens, then this happens. It never happens that way. It's like this happens, and then at some point down the line, I've got to introduce this character because, man, they're really going to like up, right? And then like, it's all this stuff, right? But it's kind of all over the place, and you just kind of are pulling and putting it together. Do you guys know John Ashbery? Yeah, I understand, right? But, you know, I can dig it. But so you do know, he's like this super famous, they say he's like the greatest American living poet, right? And so I met him over the summer, and we're at this residency, and there are like 50 other students in this residency. And John Ashbery comes out, we're at his house. John Ashbery comes out, and I'm not like a John Ashbery fan personally, for various reasons. But all the students in this thing were like John Ashbery fanatics, right? Fanatics, right? And so he comes out in his wheelchair. They're all like standing, you know, and everybody's got their questions ready. And everybody's got like the smartest questions ever, right? And they're like, yo, I can't wait to ask my super smart question. So they're like, oh, okay, who's first? And he's like, yo, this kid is like, yo, so where did you come up with the title of this? And he's like, oh, Family Guy, you know? And the kid's like, what? He's like, Family Guy. The title is from Family Guy, the cartoon. And he's like, oh. He's like, well, how did you come up with some of your word choices? And he's like, well, I know you want me to tell you that this is all some brilliant thing, but the truth is that for me, my mind is a conveyor belt of words. And at random, I pull them out and put them on the page beside each other and hope for the best. And you all get it power. And I thought to myself, wow, what an amazing thing to say. And what a very humble, right? Like, oh, I'm sorry to kill what you all think of me, but this is the truth. And I think about that because that's literally what a lot of it is like. It's like, look, I'm going to take a piece of this, a component of this part of the story I heard on NPR, this part of a story my mom said, and I'm going to figure out how to manipulate all of this around some characters that I create to make this thing happen. Somehow, somewhere. You know, and that's how it is for me and for some of my friends. Even you were saying how it's hard to get it all connected and make sure that this thing makes sense. And a lot of the time we spend is doing that. How can I make this make sense?
I like to think about Guernica, the painting by Picasso. Have you seen the photographs that his lover or wife took at the time that he was painting Guernica? No. There's this amazing series. You know that big picture of that war, and there's like the horse's head and the eyeball that comes down that's like a light and everything? Well, there's this series of pictures that shows how first he put up like the black outline of things, and then he started moving stuff around. You know, like 2 weeks later, the horse was over here, and then the horse was looking up, and then, you know, things physically moved all over, like for weeks while he was working on it. And then after a while, things sort of settled, and then he started adding more black and white and more shading and stuff. And whenever I think about how crazy my book is and how it's just like this sprawling mess of a thing, I remember, you know, I mean, it's not that I'm Picasso, but there are these processes that are completely not linear at all. And you need to sort of throw stuff up there to see what you have before you can even figure out, oh, I guess the horse has to go the other way. So it's real for me. It's really, really messy. It's just really messy, and I just have to try to have faith in that, and because I know I've done it before. And what's the worst thing that happens if I fail? So what? You know, if I fail, I'll go teach again. I'll find some, I mean, it's not like I have to be a writer. I could do other things with my life.
Right, I think we're going to open it up a little bit for some questions. And if they don't have questions, I, of course, have questions because I'm a bottomless pit. I saw that look, Chris, of questions and other things. So does anybody have any questions? We have 3 absolutely fabulous authors of contemporary. You know, one of the things we haven't really talked about is how grounded in contemporary or historical life Chris and Jason's novels are, and how the dystopian novels, Caragh, that you write are dystopian, but I, of course, believe that they're heavily grounded in reality and other things. And as I think about the theme of identity, which every one of you has woven in at least every piece of your writing that I've ever read, where it's always sort of the who am I question is just constantly out there, but it doesn't shout at you. And so it's working its way through. But I'm kind of curious, does anybody have any questions that they want to ask of them as writers, as readers, as human beings, as dedicated souls, as people who have made a living doing something they love, which is darn incredible. Let's not take that for granted. It's pretty darn good. You guys, anything? Going once? Go for it.
I hope to write one day, so this is kind of a personal-ish question, but when you're told to write something, usually teachers, especially in personal writings, they ask you to write from your own experiences, and that's where you get a lot of information. But have you ever been tempted to write about something that you really don't know all that much about, or something you want to explore, and has it gone well?
I think sometimes the most exciting things are the things that you get excited about and you want to find out about, and that comes across in your writing. I've never been to war. I know how I felt about it as a kid, and I know what angle I came at it as an adult. And I know that brought it brought a push and a pull at the same time. And following it up with tons and tons and tons of research, I think brought its own, in a small way, a combination of excitement and gravitas at the same time. And if I could only write about what I know, I'd be done already.
I think they say that because they're hoping that we'll write something from the heart, that we'll write something that we know because we care about it. But if you feel like you've had a pretty bland life, that makes you sometimes feel like you've got nothing to say. I like to jump into stories because I like to explore people who are different from me, and I feel like by creating my characters, they're really not all me. So I'm getting to do that by writing. It's really redundant, but yeah. So I feel like I think I'm writing about what I know because the emotions are me, but the experiences my characters have that get them to those emotions can be different.
And I just say, make sure you do the work. That's all. We had this question earlier today, and Chris and I talked about this exact question. Earlier, I was talking about how we had the same question last year in this room, and he pretty much kicked my butt in a debate about this.
That's never happened in his entire life.
because I was arguing at the time, and he was, for the record, he was right. So I was arguing at the time about this guy, Bill Chang. Bill Chang put out a book a couple years ago called Southern Cross the Dog. Bill Chang is an Asian American living in Queens who wrote a book about the Black Mississippi Delta and bluesmen, right? In like the 1920s. And then he went on the New York Times, and he admitted to the New York Times that he had never even been to the South. And it broke my heart, right? I was furious. And so, of course, I'm talking to Chris, and I'm like, it's irresponsible. I'm angry because I felt like he had gotten away with murder, right? It's like he wasn't even responsible enough to just go down. I mean, it's like I was telling her, it's not like he was going to Kazakhstan, right? He's like to the South, right? A $200 plane ride to the South. He could have made it a road trip, anything, right? Like go to the South and be there and steep yourself in it. And he was like, well, I've never been to war, right? Do you have to do as much as I was saying? No, not anymore, not these days, right? The truth of the matter is that you just have to do whatever the work is. You owe it to yourself and to the book to at least do the work. So like Chris's book, if he didn't do the research on Vietnam, the book really wouldn't be about Vietnam. Just because you put Vietnam on the book doesn't make it the Vietnam story if you didn't do the necessary research to make it that. So explore it and jump out there and be creative and be courageous and know that there may be some backlash occasionally, and that's okay too. That's okay too.
I mean, this is a debate that happens all the time. When Wally Lamb went on the Oprah show for She's Come Undone, he did not look like he had had any of the experiences in this New York Times best-selling novel in any way, shape, or form. And so it's something that we talk a lot about, whether, but it is about due diligence and being honest to the story that you're creating and doing the best you can. And who knows what the line is, really.
I had a Jamaican character in one of my, in this book actually, is a Jamaican cab driver, and I know patois, right? But I wasn't Jamaican patois. All the patois are different, right? So if you speak Guyanese patois, if you speak Trinidadian patois, and you speak New Orleans patois, right? And if you speak Jamaican, they're all different. And so I reached out to my Jamaican homegirl, and I was like, listen, I'm gonna send you a paragraph, and you send it back to me, translated in accurate Jamaican patois, what your dad would say, and she did. And I thanked her in the back of the book. Right? That's it.
Anybody else? Go for it.
I'm student teaching in a 3rd grade classroom this semester.
Hooray!
Yay!
Yes, thank you.
After surviving 2 semesters with me.
Hooray!
And a lot of my students get a lot of anxiety whenever we're writing. And so I wondered if you had any tips to sort of calm them down and suppress that anxiety that they get.
Oh yeah, give them markers. I am not being facetious at all. I would do it with 9th graders. If they're scared, give them colored markers. Everybody just loosens up when it's in color. I don't know what it is about it, but I really that's what I would do. You'd be amazed. You'd be amazed.
That's a really good thing. One of the things I know that I did when I was teaching is I'd say, if Jason, would you hold this for me for a second?
Yeah.
And he's having a serious writer's block and he's not working, and I'd say, Jason, it's all the pen's fault. Why don't you go and pick something else, and sort of like this idea of giving them something a way to release the tension and other things like that. So it's sort of the same kind of thing, what's going on and something.
Isn't that amazingly simple? You try it out. You have to let me know. The next time I'm on a panel here.
Which will happen. So, be prepared. Anybody else? What else do we have? Come on, you've got to have questions. Whether you want to be a reader, or I know what I like. What do you like to read now, or what did you like to read? Do you like to read in the genre you write in, or do you not read? I think Caragh and I have talked about this occasionally, about like whether you're reading in your genre or whatever. What do you like to read, or what do you think they should read? Or
Well, I'll just say I just read Chris and Jason's books. I read I didn't have Jason's most recent, so I read When I Was the Greatest, and I just really liked it. There's this incredible scene where a boy goes to a boxing ring, and the guy who runs the boxing ring, the character is really young, and the guy who runs the boxing ring asks this little boy to do to a punching bag what he would do to his father. I'm not going to tell you what happens because it's too spoiler and it's too sweet, but there was just something so delicate and lovely about that scene. It's just like I feel like I own that experience now. I feel like that's part of who I am because of how that was written. And I feel like when I read, I just like reading all kinds of stuff because it's like I'm just like soaking it in. I'm learning about it, And the conversations in Chris's book, there's this back and forth that's really quick and really natural, and I'm thinking to myself, well, what am I expecting to have happen in this scene? What's like the action? And then I realized that's the wrong question, because sometimes the question for the scene is not what happens between A and Z, but what's the emotional gain or loss that happens between A and Z. There's this totally different way of thinking about things. And so when I read his book and I'm thinking about the emotional change, they can sit on the bus and the bus is going there, but they're not really going anywhere, but they are because the emotional change is happening. You see what I'm saying? So I really like these for contemporary stuff. I read a lot of young adult, more fantasy stuff. I really like Kiss of Deception by Mary Pearson, and I like The Winter's Curse by Marie Rutkowski.
Oh my God, and I just finished the second
one. Yeah, that's a good one too. That one's really good. So I like to read all kinds of stuff.
Cool. Me too. I'm pretty open. Lately, there's just so many good books right now. Like over the last 2 years, there's like an influx of just heavy hitters. I mean,
well, there were 6,800 books for youth published last year.
So, it's a lot of books. I'm reading everything. I'm reading in the genre, of course. I'm reading, of course, I read Jackie Woodson's book.
Brown Girl Dreaming, which just won the National Book Award.
You all should read. John Corey Whaley's new book.
Noggin,
which was great. A little bit of everything. And then I read a lot of adult fiction. Lots of adult fiction. Like I just read Marlon James, A Brief History of Seven Killings. He'll probably, if he doesn't win every award, he's been robbed. That's that. I think it's a game changer in the way books are written. I think it's all from vantage point. He threw one chapter in there that's in verse. It's insane. It's all written in Jamaican patois. The whole book is in patois. But just enough of it where like if you don't speak that, you can still understand what's going on. You can it flows really. It's all about Bob Marley and like it's historical fiction. It's brilliant. Roxane Gay, Jasmine Ward. I mean, there's so many. Just also women, a lot of women writers because they're just killing in the adult world. They're just killing everything right now, especially West African women. I don't know what's happening, but like right now the gates are open and they're like. The West African women are just flooding in with these incredible different stories, just different stories that we don't necessarily know, that I don't know at least. And so it's just been really interesting and fascinating hearing about like life in Nigeria and then being a Nigerian who's in London and like going to school in London and then somehow I ended up in like Detroit and now I'm like this Nigerian woman who's British and in America and what does that mean and who am I, what's my identity, what's my background, what's my history. Where do I stand in all these different cultures? Brilliant. A lot of brilliant books by West African women writers. Like over the last 2 years, it's probably like 20.
I read mostly nonfiction. I find, especially when I'm doing stuff like this, I have this recurring nightmare of being caught out on anything that's factual. Since I never really, I was well deep into my career before I really made use of actual facts. And even when I wasn't doing it early on, out of kindness, I had like my first or second book, there was a librarian contacted HarperCollins, which was my publisher at the time, to offer the kind advice that I had a sunflower growing in March in my book. And I'm like, oh, I see. I'm going to have to watch my P's and Q's really well. And in something like this, and in an era like this, that was in 1995.
And librarians love to catch those kinds of things.
And I'm happy to provide them from time to time, but boy, I don't want to, it makes you really be on top of it. So I'm finding myself reading, I mean, it's a very male reading pattern anyway, especially for reluctant readers, which I still sort of have to claim ownership of that tribe.
You said you didn't read for a year. You didn't read till
I was in
college.
university. I didn't read anything voluntarily that was fiction. When I was a kid, the only things I would read would be sports biographies and World War II books.
But earlier today at Wyndham High School, you made a pretty impassionate plea to read a classic. Do you want to do a real elevator pitch for reading the classic? I bet
You're
you could.
determined to whip my ass today.
I'm going to go to sleep soon on an airplane.
Okay.
I think these people all read, though.
Do you all read? No, they don't.
They're just nodding. They're nodding. They read.
Okay, they read.
She's talking about a specific classic.
I am talking about a specific classic. He told a great story about a classic.
It's a really good story.
It's a crazy
I made half of it up. Now I have to make up a new story.
Okay.
Or remember, and I don't listen to myself when I'm talking. I'm just joking.
Okay.
It's Jekyll and Hyde. Because I live in Scotland and because I have a passionate affair with Edinburgh. And Jekyll and Hyde is...
You've been living in Scotland for how long?
16 years.
16 years.
17 years. And Jekyll and Hyde, it's famously set in London, but it's an emotional biography of the city of Edinburgh. It is completely split down the middle, the old town and the new town. And the old town was manky and it grew up tall and the sun didn't get in, and the Edinburghers who had money wanted a new town, and in the 1700s they built a new town, and it's still glistening, brand new, beautiful, gorgeous thing. But they emptied a lock in between the two. The spine of Edinburgh Castle runs down right between the two of them. That's the Royal Mile. Bottom is Holyrood Palace, and the top is the castle. And just on the other side was this big, deep lake. And they had to...
A lock?
A lock is an inland lake, basically. A lot of them are connected to the ocean. Some of them are completely inland, but it's, that's just, I don't think there's any place in Scotland, there might be one or two where they actually call them lakes, but whether they're connected to the sea or not, they call them lochs. And when they dredged it, it was all full of bones and all full of dead people, because one of the things about Edinburgh is it was a center for all kinds of very rapid medical developments in Robert Louis Stevenson's time and before. And there became a really quick need for cadavers. And the first thing that happened was they started, grave robbing became a big deal. At the cemetery in my small town, at the entrance is mounted one of these great big wrought iron things that they place on top of caskets until they decomposed properly and they could move it to the next one, because it was rampant. And then Burke and Hare were the guys who were one half of the inspiration. They were grave robbers. And then they realized that with all the down and outs in Edinburgh, digging people up was kind of more effort than they needed, so they were just whacking people and selling them to the universities and to the hospitals who were not asking any questions.
Wow.
And nobody was asking questions about these people because they made sure they were all down and outs. But I've seen plays and read other books, adaptations. It's very, very, very much the two sides of Jekyll and Hyde are the two sides of the very always at war sides of Edinburgh's very John Knox puritanical side, and the completely dirty and filthy and rambunctious side that is the Old Town, which I love the Old Town. But I also love the New Town. Very cultured, very beautiful, very clean. And there was a second person that Robert Louis Stevenson based it on, and he was a pillar of society who also, his main day job was he was a high-end locksmith. So in the daytime he would be servicing the esteemed burghers of Edinburgh, and making copies of their keys. And at night he was in everybody's house and he was pillaging. He was a one-man Viking invasion. He was stealing from people and killing people and all this stuff. But the thing that's always just stuck right in me was that whole thing that it's in the same chest. This dichotomy is in there. And it was so much. I've never seen a place that physically, obviously embodies it more than Edinburgh does. And that's, for me, that's Robert Louis Stevenson's genius. He saw it so early on. There are a few things that he's been really great at. I'm not a great reader of the classics, but I'm a big fan of Robert Louis Stevenson, and I'm not far from Ballantrae.
What do you think of the theory that he was inspired by a nightmare to write Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde?
I'm pretty unconvinced by that.
I love that. I love that story. I have to admit, I'm going to be going. I've been thinking about it all afternoon. I'll be going back to it.
Can I just throw this one thing? One of the
Yes,
plays
you may.
I saw was called The Breathing House, and I forget who wrote it, but it was at the same time, and it pretty much dramatized in more real Edinburgh terms the two sides. The Breathing House was this kind of tuberculosis-ridden place. But it was also the mistress of this doctor from the New Town who wouldn't do it. He would give her money, but the set was beautiful. It was like one heart that was half rotted. And this very well-dressed doctor, he would, had his whole family over there. And we're only talking, it's a half a mile between these two places, but it is opposite sides of the universe. And he would come in, and it was it was hard to be there, like one of those paintings where one person is naked and one person isn't, and then one person is exposed and one person is taking advantage just without even making contact. And she was riddled with disease and everything, and he still, in one way, sees himself as gallant. He has feelings for her, but there's this thing between his world and hers, which they've both accepted. She never even brings it up, but he comes to visit her, doesn't do anything to heal her or to heal the two sides of this equation. it's chilling and it's deeply sad, but it was a powerful play. And even the set was going the whole time. It was it's a great theater town.
Yeah, my brain is spinning, and I'm also thinking about how you've just set aside a lot of the metaphors that appear in a lot of your books, actually. That whole divide in the worlds that we cross and how we cross them internally and externally.
Yeah.
Which actually comes across all three of your works very clearly. So I want to wrap things up a little bit. I'm going to give one last chance for what I often say to my class: questions, comments, or threats on my life, as long as they're really good threats and other things. And then I want to thank you guys. So does anybody have anything for any of our three authors? Go for it.
So I'm an English major, and I took adolescent lit a couple semesters ago, and one of the things that we really talked about, which all three of you have actually mentioned, and Dr. Richards, you pointed it out, talking about the really gritty issues. And I wanted to ask you guys if you've had any issues with censorship, maybe either from your publishers, your editors, or maybe your fans, or just like, what are you doing with this? This is just wrong, or good for you for tackling this type of issue.
Well, for me, the story itself, I didn't get much censorship issues with this one. With either of them, I haven't had. There's a sex
And
scene.
he also put a gun. They also put a gun on the cover.
But that was an issue.
Yes.
It hasn't been in a lot of the places we've been speaking. That one's just vanished.
Yeah. So like,
because of the gun.
There's always this book, the gun on the cover. So basically, all the schools, like when it came out, before it came out, it was a big deal because they were like, look, we're going to try to get this in all the schools because kids in urban communities need this book, right? That was the whole thing. And then the gun was on the cover. And every school was like, I can't really put the gun on the cover. It's just a gun, right? Even though it's covered in yarn, it's a stark image of a gun. It's not anybody, like, if it were a soldier, it'd be okay, right? If it were a half-naked young girl on a romance novel, it'd be okay.
Particularly her shoulders, her back.
Of course, no problem, right? Not a worry. But not a gun, right? I mean, Ellen Hopkins has her book Crank. The title is in powder.
Yeah.
Like, the title is in powder, right? But the gun, it literally, Barnes & Noble was like, we won't carry the book. You know, and my editor was like, all right, well, then don't carry it. Then they said, okay, we'll carry the book, right? You know, almost every single school that's tried to get it, the administration or the parents, libraries, I've had, like, librarians, you know, be upset about it, or I go places and the cover's not on the book, or they have to take all the covers off, or I mean, it's interesting how much flack it's caught just because of the fact that there's a gun. And they put the only reason they even did this is because they knew, Simon & Schuster knew that there was going to be an issue with the cover.
Because often
there's nothing on here.
Yeah, exactly.
But they were like, you know what? Let's deboss it and print it into the book because they knew that the cover was going to be so much flack. It's so stupid, but I get it. And they chose to do the gun 2 weeks after Sandy Hook, and so literally it was like, I mean, it was a mess. It was a mess, but it's part of the process.
Get to remove the gun here and your name.
Yeah, exactly.
They did it is beautifully designed.
Thank you.
Yeah. I guess I talked about Prize in the morning session, not this one.
No, you talked a little bit about the abortion, which is a form of thinking and grappling with that is a form of censorship and everything.
It was. I was concerned that my editor would censor me writing about abortion, but she was really supportive, and I feel like I just said that, so I don't want to repeat myself. But I've weighed decisions about censorship, and for the most part, I have found my editors to be incredibly supportive. They want me to explore whatever I want to. In fact, the book I'm working on now has a really creepy character in it that I did not expect to be very important. I kept thinking he was going to, get left behind, and he's insisted on staying on in the book, and he's just really creepy. And I asked my editor if he was too creepy, and she said, well, I think he's a little creepy, but I'm a prude, so we're not going to listen to me on that. So I thought that was pretty sweet. I was like, no, you're not a prude. And she said, yes, I'm really a prude. So we established that. But I'm going to go ahead with my smutty mind, I guess. She's going to try not to get in my way.
And what about you, Chris? And I've been thinking about sort of conversations about inexcusable.
Subtle.
Okay, so that wasn't so subtle.
You know what? Yeah, I really dislike the bra on the cover. And I asked them, if you got to do that, can we just have something balancing? This is a story really about a conflict between two people, and they're having the debate throughout the book.
For those who can't see it, it's just an outline. It's like a black lace bra.
And I just thought, they're trying so many of the books we see for YA, and they never even come close to saying they're doing this. But they're, even in a book that's talking about sex abuse, they're selling sex. I hate it. In fact, I hate this one even more. This girl is it's just a whole cover. It's another version of the same book.
It's the same book with a different cover.
I had it worse.
Fact,
She's just
Google
pouting.
Inexcusable by Chris Lynch. In images, you'll see the various covers that this book has had in its 10-year life.
Yeah, and thank God they got it right this time.
So this is the new cover that came out this week.
It treats it as, something serious and something nuanced and something, yeah. But this, the girl was, look, I mean, that doesn't represent anything. She's just pouting. And she's not pouting in the book, she's furious. And, coloring her red doesn't cover that. But on a very specific note, the stuff, I mean, you heard how I said I was very accommodating with the move down to middle grade. I understood their concerns, and I understood what I wanted out of this, and how I really made the effort to make it appropriate and make it artistically appropriate, not just chopping and changing. One review said, the reviews have been universally really good. And one review said, oh yeah, everything's good, this is good, this is good, this is appropriate, this is appropriate. The only thing is there is a slight language issue with the swearing. And I said, swearing? And then she got out, she got more specific. She goes, but mostly it's just of the G's variety, Jeez. She said, jeez.
That's swearing.
It's like, Jeez. Eye of a needle, ladies and gentlemen, an eye of a needle. Yeah. Barnes & Noble won't carry these, they say.
The Barnes & Noble buyer has an enormous amount of power in the publishing industry, probably singly more power than any one human being in the publishing industry. And so when Barnes & Noble says, I won't carry it, publishers debate whether they're going to change the cover, stick with it, or whatever. And an inside story, for instance, is this year's 2014 Caldecott Award winner, which is Locomotive by Brian Floca, which has very little controversial in it whatsoever, except a possible debate over a possible slight over Native Americans. Barnes & Noble did not purchase it at all, and so when they got literally thousands of requests for it within the 10 minutes after the Caldecott Award was announced, the buyer decided that maybe they should buy it and make it available. So
Barnes & Noble's rationale, they have a rule. We do not do middle grade war books.
It's just a blanket rule.
I'm like, well, how about middle grade anti-war books? They just won't talk about it. They say, we'll stock it in YA. I'm like, look at the covers. They're not, no YA guys are going to, very few, unless there's in libraries they work, because librarians are talking to them about it. They've done, it only underscores my determination to go with what it took to get into the clubs and fairs, because that has been its entire survival. And there was things in these series that I'm as proud of as anything I've ever written. And I'd be heartbroken if they didn't get anywhere, if they just sat there for stupid reasons like this. A long time ago, I wrote a series called the He-Man Women Haters Club. And if you're familiar with the Little Rascals and their club, it was not about hating anybody. It was about fear. It was all about stupid, lunk-headed maleness and the inability to say, I'm afraid of something, so anything you're afraid of, you hate. I hate that, I hate it. And they're terrified of girls, and it was all about that, and it's all there on the first page. It nails its colors to the mast right away. And it is, in its modest way, a feminist series. For the first time, usually any flack I get, it's usually from the right flank. But let's be fair and balanced. I got a call from an editor, said, listen, Chris, it's going to be up to you. but we have this bunch of independents, this particular group of independents, who say if you don't change the title, your book is not getting in there. And I'm like, have they read the one page? Ask them to read the one page. I'm on their side. We're on the same side. And again, they were just as rigid as this guy. We have our rules, and that's that. It's like sometimes it can be demoralizing to try to write anything with any nuance.
Right.
How about if I put a bra on the cover of the He-Man Women Haters Club? Will you put it in then? Let's put the same thing on the war books. Let's just go for it. I'm fed up and sick to death with all the YA books with PYTs on the cover. And, no more pretty young things.
I was so happy to have this one.
Terrible.
Look at this cover.
In fact, there's
That's
actually,
gorgeous.
if you
It's
will,
absolutely
there's a lot
gorgeous
of things
book.
about gender and cover, and I'm just tired enough that there's actually was even a gender project that it wasn't Maureen Johnson. Did she tweet it out? Where she took all of these books and they created different gender covers, just sort of different versions. And it might have been Maureen Johnson, but if you're interested in it, you can come find me in my hovel of books on Web Hall, and we'll talk a little bit about gender and other things. Allie Bruce also writes a lot about gender and covers and talks about it. And a couple of things I just want to say. First, I want to thank you all three for being here, whether you traveled from nearby or very, over a very large lake. Whether you came from Brooklyn, where I really hope to be tomorrow, because I think I have work to do there, or other things like that. And I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank all of you for being here, and particularly Chris and Jason for coming back after our snow day last year, because it takes a lot of diligence and treasure, and we're really happy to have you here. I want to make you all know that the bookstore, the Eastern Connecticut State University Bookstore, which is at Barnes & Noble, let me just throw that out there, does have copies of all three of our authors' latest books, and the ability to have a signed book that you can treasure and share with yourself or someone else is a wonderful thing. I say that as a person who, Jess and one of the front rows here can attest to, has thousands, well, Jen can too, has thousands of signed books and other things that I've managed to share around the world and other things, and how exciting that is. And I want to thank you all for being here and sharing your insights about writing for young adults, your story making, and helping everyone here at Eastern Connecticut State University and Wyndham High School to understand that they can be story makers too. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.